Gumshoes. Welcome back. I'm going to give you all a minute to let me know if you hear me, and then we have a lot to cover tonight. So we are going to jump right in. This is going to be probably one of the deepest dives I've taken to date. Right in. Okay, you can hear me. Great. Okay. All right. I am, a couple things. One, it's great to be back. One word of caution is, I had to take a break because of a health issue, but I have not discussed the health issue publicly because I don't want to become part of the story. So I just ask that you please maintain my privacy, and kind words are always appreciated. I actually do read the chats after the lives. The one disappointment about taking the approach that I take is that I don't really get to interact with you guys. So anyway, so I don't want the pity, and I don't want some of the disreputable news sources following the case to make me part of the story against my will. So having said that, another announcement, I'm going to do maybe 2 or 3 topical lives, and then we're going to start the Mother of All series that just might take us right up until the trial, whenever the trial might be. So I'll announce it as the time gets closer, but I think it will be a really interesting series. Okay, without further ado, I am going to share my screen. Oops. Oh man. Turns out I was sharing my screen. Sorry about that. Here I am, and I'll come back for the Q&A. So, one other thing I will touch on is that we're just going to have to maintain a little bit of flexibility with these lives. I'm talking to myself here. So I'm in between treatments at the moment. I'm doing extraordinarily well, much better than was anticipated. And that's why I decided to start jumping back into the case as energy permitted. But there may be times where, it gets to 7 p.m. and I just can't pull it off. If that happens, and the lives will resume for the most part on Friday nights. But if that happens, then we'll just either push it to the weekend or push it to the next week. But I really did miss hanging out with the community. Okay, now without further ado, we are going to jump into the content. Okay. All right. Hopefully you all can see my screen. I'm actually going to open this up. Okay, I can see that you can see my screen. All right, great. Let's jump in. It's taking a little while to load because it's a longer presentation. And I'm not using my business Google Drive, which would be faster. Anyway, okay, so tonight we are going to talk about Melanie and Zulema. And I'm going to pose the question of if they are both guilty of participating in conspiracy to commit murder. One thing I want to say right off the bat, first of all, I'm not just taking the law into my own hands. I talk about this in probably just about every live. I have no training in law enforcement. I'm diving into the FOIA docs, and I'm trying to interpret some of these reports as best as possible. I will always err on the side of disclosure and let people make their own decisions. Also, I'm not looking to be cruel to Melanie or Zulema. I realize even the people who played a role in all of these, deaths, murders, they were also to some degree victims of Lori and Chad, but they were willing victims, unlike the victims who actually lost their lives. But my primary objective, always in every live I do, and I really kind of mull this over in my mind. I kind of hold court in my own mind. What are my motives here? Am I trying to just expose just for the sake of exposure? And my main objective is always to tell the stories of the victims who ultimately lost their lives. And they're just, in this particular case, there just isn't a really sharp line between victims and perpetrators. So, okay, without further ado, we are actually close to 10,000 signatures. So if you haven't signed um, this petition, no, do I think that Phoenix Police cares about this petition? No, but I hope that this petition goes on, ad infinitum, and that at some point, it could be 10, 20, 30 years from now, there may be someone who rises up the ranks in Phoenix, in the Phoenix Police Department, who actually has a fire in his or her belly and picks up this case. If you follow true crime, you have certainly seen that happen with other cases. Okay, so you can go to bit.ly/, it's basically justice for Joe without the vowels. Okay, I already talked about that. Okay, so first on the docket, let's talk about Zulema. All right, a little bit of background. First of all, because I haven't done a live about Zulema, I don't find her a particularly interesting or compelling character. I may at some point do a live, but I'm just going to do kind of a quick overview. I don't like to operate under the assumption that people listening to one of these lives for the first time has previous knowledge about the case. So I'm just going to do just kind of a whirlwind overview about Zulema, some of the main talking points. Like Melanie Gibb, she thought she had a special calling. On November 3rd, 2018, Zulema tells Lori that she was told by God that she is to protect Lori. Now, one thing to keep in mind, she had just met Lori 2 weeks prior to this. So she meets Lori. This was when Lori was at Melanie Gibbs' house and shared her testimony. That's when she talked about wanting to murder Joe Ryan, et cetera, et cetera. She was very manic. So I just think, like, what was going on in the minds of the people who were in that group that day, as she's talking about basically telling the bishop, either give me a temple recommend or I'm going to murder my ex-husband. And it's a bizarre testimony. It's out there if you haven't heard it. Someone passed it on to me pretty early in the case, and it was legally obtained. Okay. Also, like Melanie Gibb, she lacked healthy boundaries. There are so many examples of this, but just a few that I'll share. They have this back and forth, lots of kind of nonsense. But then Lori says to Zulema, "Let's get to work, baby girl." Now, keep in mind, Zulema is older than I am. I know that because her personal details were left unredacted in the Gilbert police report. And so I actually saw her date of birth. I redacted it in any screenshots that I share. But I'm quite a bit older than Melanie. So Zulema was much older than, not Melanie. She's quite a bit older than Lori. So I'm quite a bit older than Lori. Zulema is older than I am. So this is a much older woman who Lori is calling baby girl, and you see no pushback. And there's another time when Lori actually says to Zulema that she's a proud mama. Now, Zulema wasn't one of Lori's kids in a previous probation. And that's another interesting point about Zulema. And again, I'm not trying to be cruel in this, but all of these other players, Melanie Gibb, Melanie then Boudreau, now Pawlowski, Serena, all of these other players, they were Lori and Chad's children in other probations. And Chad and Lori had these detailed documents that actually detailed like who each of these characters were in previous probations. And Zulema wasn't included in any of those. In fact, you'll see in a minute, she actually has to ask Lori who she was in a previous probation, and Lori uses it to promote her own agenda. So Zulema was pretty consistently left out, and you see this struggle to get to the top. And I will share how I believe she got to the top. And so that's in a few slides. Okay, so Lori is able to call her baby girl, and that was able to fly. And I've talked about this in previous lives, but Lori tried something similar to that with me one time. She referred to me as being like a little sister, and I was very gracious, but I just stopped her, and I was like, yeah, okay. And that's not possible. I wasn't mean, but I just gently just pushed back, like, no, no. And then she actually sent me a follow-up email. I think it was months later, possibly a year later. And the subject line of the email was, "You're still little to me," or something like that. And so she tried to do this with me, but that wasn't, I mean, we all have boundary issues. That just wasn't one of mine. I knew that she was, Joe's PYT. So, okay. All right. Next. Whoops. Oops. Okay. In another interaction, she asked Lori if she should move. So she said to Lori, this was in April, I was at the temple this morning asking if I need to move. I didn't get a definite answer. Is the Lord telling you anything I need to know? I have to let my landlord know by the end of this month if I'm moving or not. And and then 1 minute later, so take note of the time. It's 11:09 in the morning. 1 minute later, she sends almost the identical text to Chad. So she says to Chad, I was at the temple this morning asking if I need to move. I didn't get a definite answer. Is the Lord telling you anything I need to know? I have to let my landlord know by the end of this month if I'm moving or not. And then, they both say like, no, you don't need to move. She tells Chad, hello, Chad, thank you for reassuring me that where I am living is going to be okay. I was getting anxiety when I thought of moving. And she told Lori, thanks for checking for me. I was wondering why I was feeling uneasy about moving and creating a lot of anxiety for me. So one thing to keep in mind here is, she had a teen daughter at home at the time. So we know from one of the other interactions, I think Kara, graduated high school like maybe a month and a half after this, sometime in May. So she still had a daughter at home. And in one interaction, she talked about how Kara, because Zulema was still convinced that she needed to move to Idaho, but she was just trying to figure out when and how she was going to approach that with Kara, who she said felt resentful and felt like her mom was just planning to abandon her. So here she is with a teen at home, a senior in high school, and she's like, hey, are you guys hearing anything from the Lord? Like, am I supposed to move? Okay. Oh, then she also asked if she should take her daughter to Chile. So this was right after Kara graduated high school. And she said, anything that says sent, that's Zulema. Sometimes I didn't put the Z and the L. And this one is Lori. So Zulema said, did Chad answer on whether Kara should go to Chile with me or not? And Lori said, yes, he did. He got a big yes that you should take Kara to Chile. Now, keep in mind, this was just a few minutes later. I mean, this just shows Lori's kind of disregard for Zulema. I mean, she didn't even take note of the spelling of Kara's name. She's just not, obviously a conscientious person at all. And then she follows up, do not leave her at home. Now, why would Zulema need to know if Chad and Lori thought that she should take Kara or leave her at home? She was going back to visit family. In fact, she talks about different family members. One she actually thought was dark and was going to be swept up in these, catastrophic, I think, floods or earthquakes or something. So she had some pretty dark thoughts about some of her family members, including, I think, her son in law. She actually announced that he was a dark spirit. And I think she thought that maybe they would like care that she has this family member who she thinks is a dark spirit, and she just wasn't getting like they're not going to avenge the dark spirits in her life. And I think in their minds that really wasn't Zulema's role. Like you see this push me pull you dynamic between Lori and Zulema quite a bit. Chad was kinder to her. He ghosted her a couple times, but Lori had a solid pattern of ghosting her and just like not replying. And then Zulema would come back kind of groveling and ask her how she was doing and tell her, oh, you must be under so much stress, and kind of prime the pump to get Lori to reply to her. And I mean, it's a pretty troubling dynamic between them at times. Okay, another example of her lack of boundaries. A new thing I started doing, if there's a date element to a screenshot, or at least to something that I'm highlighting, I just put the date up here because it was, we're going to jump kind of deep into a timeline, and it was just getting a little repetitive, having each of the titles start with, on 9/26, on 9/28, et cetera. So just kind of keep an eye out for that. So on October 30th, Lori reaches out to Zulema. So she's about to ask her for something. So she love bombs her. Hi, beautiful. Alex and Mel may have to come there tomorrow and may need a place to stay. They could always stay at a hotel, but your house might be more protected. Extremely manipulative. Just like no notice. And like, well, I mean, obviously like your house is protected, so it would be much better for them to stay at your place. Zulema replies, my room is available, I'll sleep with Kara. Now also another thing to note here is this is less than a month before Zulema and Alex marry. And she's like, oh, I'll just sleep with Kara, leaving her bedroom to Melanie and Alex, which is weird. So who knows? Maybe Alex slept on the sofa, but we'll touch on her relationship with Alex in a minute. Lori, you are so great. We love you. Zulema, Lori doesn't even give her a time or anything. So Zulema, it's the day of, it's that morning, and Zulema's like, are they here? And that's when Lori lets her know, oh, they fly in tonight at 5 p.m. Zulema replies, it's going to be a little crazy at my house, but we will manage. LOL. I mean, like Zulema is basically the McFly of this story. And then she replies, I can't wait to see them. And then, Sorry. Zulema said, Halloween night with my grandkids. But, she can't wait to see them, even though she's going to be busy doing Halloween with her grandkids. Then Lori replies, oh, yeah, forgot it was Halloween. Now, we'll touch on why Zulema wouldn't have been concerned or surprised that Lori's 7-year-old son wouldn't be partaking in Halloween, because what mother of a 7-year-old, unless they just didn't participate, but Lori was barely even religious. I mean, she did definitely profess a relationship with Jesus and a commitment to the LDS church, but she didn't wear garments or anything like that. And so she doesn't strike me as someone who would be like, okay, we're anti Halloween. So it's very unusual for a mother of an excitable 7-year-old to be like, yeah, I forgot it was Halloween. So for a normal person who might be concerned about the welfare of her son, that would be very odd. Okay. She was also petty and competitive. So, this I'm actually going to read the entire interaction. Zulema said, I have a question for you. What are these experiences that Serena keeps having? She thought that today she finished her physical. I don't know what that means, something in their little crazy world. Is she moving forward again, or is she still at the same place? Now, also keep in mind, by way of reminder, Serena was one of Lori and Chad's kids in a previous probation. Zulema wasn't. So Zulema is just kind of like, I think Zulema probably knew she couldn't go after Melanie Gibbs. She couldn't go after Melanie's. But Serena was, she was a candidate. So Lori replies, hey, I have her at 33% physical, whatever that means. I called her yesterday to see how she was doing, but we keep playing phone tag. I don't think that could have possibly happened, ... Sadly. What do you think we should do to help? Zulema, IDK, I'm just wondering if she's being deceived. It's hard to tell. I've mentioned being humble a lot to her, but she says she's being humble. It confuses me at times because, yeah, that definitely sounds like something a humble person would urge a proud person to do. Like, it's just so crazy. Like, that she's talking to Serena repetitively about her need to be humble. Lori, yes, I know. I just know that she hasn't moved in weeks, so I'm not sure what's going on with her. I'm asking and praying how to handle it. It's been a crazy week, but I'll try to concentrate on that today. Yeah, it's been a crazy week because look at the timestamp. I mean, they're preparing Charles' murder allegedly. So Lori's probably like, yeah, I don't really care so much about what Serena has going on. Okay. Zulema, I see some tendencies of acting like those self-righteous people in the church. I also see how people in the church try to show off their kids to boost their, quote, righteousness. She said that she read the Book of Mormon very fast, and there's extra blessings from that. So I'm wondering if she's being deceived because it sounds like she's caught up in the cultural part of the church. So again, this makes no sense, but that's pretty par for the course with their interactions. I've lost at least 27 IQ points reading their interactions. Okay, so Lori replies, I agree. It's like she wants the fast track to heaven. We both know that it is through long suffering that the Lord works. It's his timing, and we have to accept his will. I mean, again, the irony of her talking about long suffering and waiting on the Lord's timing when in less than 2 weeks, her husband will be lying dead on her living room floor. It's absolutely astounding. Okay, Zulema. So they're using that to get in, and deceive her. Kind of like when I was mad at Kara, they were able to come in and attack me. They will use any weakness or terror in our spiritual or energy fields. They're giving her some very real visions dreams and experiences. Lori, this is hilarious to me. Or she is making them up. I'm not sure. It's hard to discern because she is really convincing when you talk with her. I mean, give me a big fat freaking break. All of this is made up. They were making up miraculously getting their periods back and then being bright red and crampy. And I mean, they were making up everything. Most of their interactions, I mean, it's a case study in arrested development. So and here they are judging Serena like, well, I don't know, I mean, she might just be making it all up. She's just so convincing. It's really just unbelievable. Okay. Number 4, her marriage was arranged. So I thought this interaction was supremely interesting. This was in August. And now keep in mind, Zulema had been married 5 times before she married Alex. So Alex was her 6th marriage, I believe. Yes. So Zulema follows up with Lori. She said, were you trying to tell me the other day that Alex is going to be my husband to finish my mission here? Now, a little bit of backstory before I continue. They had an interaction earlier, much earlier in the year. I want to say maybe February or March. And Lori cautioned them. This was, I believe, Christina, Serena, Zulema, both Melanies. Lori told them that they need to be careful what they said to Alex because Alex was a first creation, meaning this was his first life or probation, his first trip around the mountain. And she actually compared him to a kindergartner trying to comprehend PhD material. So having read some of these interactions, I mean, obviously none of this is heady PhD material. So serious arrogance in that regard. But here Alex was, this baby, and by the time Alex died, we read in Chad's patriarchal blessing to Alex. He tells him that he's a 5th creation, meaning this was his 5th life or probation. So he went from being a first creation to a 5th probation. But at the time that Lori apparently told Zulema that she was supposed to marry Alex, she had just said he was a multiple creation. So he went from a first creation to a multiple creation. And ultimately, just days before his death, he was a 5th creation. Now, when the investigators asked Zulema about this whole multiple probation thing, she actually volunteered that Chad had told her that she was a 4th or 5th probation. Now, did Chad tell her, I don't know, you're either a 4th or 5th probation? This is just my opinion, but I think Chad told her she was a 4th creation, and this was her 4th probation. And I think Zulema took umbrage at the fact that they kind of lost track of what their story was. And in the end, Alex was above Zulema and you'll see where that comes into play in this interaction. Okay. So Zulema follows up. I'm a little slow at times and I don't get hints. Lori replies, yes. Did you get that answer? 2 question marks. And then she replies again, it's what we saw in the future. So I'm sure she's referring to her and Chad, what they saw. Zulema said, I had an impression when I met him for the first time, but I dismissed it quickly because I really didn't want to have a man again in this life. And you pick up on that theme in other interactions. She didn't want to be married again. But she always has to, like, Zulema really saw herself as a prophet. So she kept putting herself out there as a prophet. And you could tell by Lori's responses, she needed Zulema's cooperation, especially when Zulema sends this one truly horrible text to her. But she takes umbrage at Zulema putting herself out there as one who gets all these visions and has all these prophecies. But Zulema has no ability to read the room. So she just keeps pummeling her. That's what Zulema got out of this. I think that's also what Melanie Gibb got out of it. I think they just needed this feedback that they were really special, that they had these extraordinary callings, and that they were actually going to help lead this group of 144,000. Okay, so she has to say, like, yeah, I did kind of have this impression, but I dismissed it because he's such a doofus. She didn't say that, but she did. And Zulema said, I'll ask in the temple tomorrow. Lori, okay, that's good. Always ask the Lord. He's the only one who knows what he has in store. And Zulema, again, she's just so groveling. She replies to Lori, you always encourage me to do that. I love that about you. And then Lori's like, so what time are you going to the temple tomorrow? And I wondered if Lori kind of planned to meet up with her to, really push this agenda. And we will talk about why I think that Lori needed her to marry Alex. So Zulema says early, 7 a.m. Then Zulema asks Lori, does he know? And Lori said, yes, he knows. He knew before we told him what we saw. Zulema, interesting. And this is Zulema bristling. He knew. The one that can't see anything. And I think this was supposed to say thick veil and all. I didn't. And I'm the one that can see things. So you can tell she's like, I'm supposed to be the more elevated creation here. How did he know this and I didn't? And so then she said, so in the past 2 days, I've had guys come to me at Starbucks while I'm working. That hasn't happened to me in, like, I don't know how long. Woeful. Lori, funny. When it rains, it pours. A little element of humor for you. Ha ha. Zulema, LOL. And then Zulema is back to business. Okay, so can you check this person for me, please? And this was Kelly, someone. She was always asking, like, if people were light or dark, or who they were in a previous probation, things like that. Now, another interesting thing to note here is that this whole push to marry Alex came after a failed attempt to try to nudge Zulema to marry David. I am sure that this is David Warwick. To my knowledge, there wasn't another David in the group, and clearly he was in this inner group. So Lori says, my understanding is that according to our own missions, I don't remember what the original question was, different people will do different things. Some will stay and help. Some will go to the next round. Some will come back during the millennium. Zulema, that makes sense. The remnant will go to the next round. Like, American Idol. Lori, yep, that's so cool. That's so cool, right? Because basically the multiple creations are done when the Savior comes again. Yay. Then she says, then you will go off with your eternal companion, in parentheses, David, and create your own world. And I think that part of the reason for this is, one, they wanted to marry off these people with other group members. But then also, Zulema was sending Chad all of these text messages, not as many as she sent Lori, but quite a few. And just, again, just kind of groveling, asking him questions that she knew the answers to, all kinds of nonsense. And I think Lori was just kind of like, Zulema, how about you get your own man and leave mine alone? Again, this is me reading into all of these interactions. But Um, then we will all come back to help fight at the end of the millennium. Then Zulema's like, very cool. I've been studying and getting more knowledge about the priesthood. We have Adamic or familial priesthood. We have it together with our husbands. Can we use it individually and without our husbands physically here? So you can tell she's like, so yeah, about that whole husband thing. I mean, we can do this without a husband though, right? The reason I ask is that we're in the middle of warfare. I have been casting out, and I know I get rid of some, but not others, higher level darks and demons. But Chad can. Again, this is her kind of kowtowing to Lori, and by flattering her, like, "Wow, your man can," because he's at the top of the food chain here, because he uses the priesthood. Can we use our priesthood to cast out and destroy weapons? Chad found a sword, and I think it was supposed to be originally one sword, but then it looks like she kind of upgraded it to multiple swords and helmets on Serena and I today that were causing us headaches and muffled communication with the Lord. This is very much a typical interaction between them. And Lori replied, yes, you and I can use the priesthood. We have it. And at another point, so this was March 8th, this interaction. A little later in the month, March 27th, uh, by way of background, Zulema had asked her who she was in her previous lives. Lori doesn't answer her, I think, for like at least a couple weeks. And then out of the clear blue, she replies, Portius and Mohana, I guess that's how you pronounce their names. She said, this is you and David. You sound like Greek gods. And again, you can see like Zulema, she's not able to, set healthy boundaries, but she kind of wiggles out of it. She's like, LOL, it does. I love the names. Not the journey, but the names. Yeah, yeah, they're cool. But you can tell, like, typically Zulema is 100% down with whatever Lori and Chad are suggesting. And here, in her ever so minimal way, she's kind of like, just not into it. Okay. Another thing about Zulema, she was allegedly, and I just have it down at the bottom here because I ran out of space. She was allegedly Alex's go-to when he botched Brandon Boudreaux's shooting. And so this was an email from Elizabeth Keller, who uh, is an analyst with the FBI in the Phoenix office. And she was writing this email to Ryan Pilar, I guess is how you pronounce his name. But she said, good morning, Ryan, what is the telephone number that Alex's phone was in touch with during the Gilbert shooting time frame that came back to the Hispanic female? Well, to my knowledge, Zulema is the only Hispanic female in this whole cast of characters. And in fact, I think, and this is kind of off the cuff, but I think the only other even like Hispanic person that I can think of off the top of my mind was what was his name? Hector Sosa, I think his name was. So, this wasn't like a really diverse group. So for Alex to be in touch with a Hispanic female, I feel reasonably confident in surmising that this was Zulema. Then she said, I'll search that to see if it's connected to any money transfers. Well, elsewhere, there was an email from Ryan to Elizabeth, and these emails were just flying back and forth. And it appears there was some kind of money transfer. So it's a little opaque. So I'm just going to read it. But he said, Elizabeth, thank you for the workups. I have not talked with Brian, whatever his name is, a Gilbert crime analyst yet, but I plan to this week. Also, the financial transfers by Alex appear to be related to the individual he was on the phone with during the Gilbert shooting. So this was October 2nd, obviously the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux. I will confirm this later today. So he he either didn't circle back, or it wasn't included in the FOIA docs, or it was redacted. Um, but yeah. So then rinse and repeat the day Alex botched Tammy's shooting again, allegedly. This one, it says, I'll start here. The Cox 9120 True subscribe phone. So this was Alex's actual cell phone, not one of his burner phones, appears to stay at or near the apartments during the attempted shooting. Now, kind of tuck that away in your mind, because we're going to circle back to that. But so his actual cell phone stayed in the apartments during the attempted shooting of Tammy. It makes an outbound text. So this was quite a bit later that night at 21:16 to Lori. I'm showing drive time from apartment to Chad's as about 10 minutes. It shows up again at 23:28 when it sends an outbound text to, and I've talked about this in other lives, but some of these emails are in duplicate and sometimes triplicate, because they're coming from these different agencies, including Gilbert, Chandler, and the FBI. And so when I would find one, I would search the OCR document to see if I could find another reference to the same email or whatever it was, with fewer redactions. And I did in this instance, and I made a note here. This is unredacted in a different copy of this email and is Zulema's known phone number. I verified with a Google search. So the number was left unredacted, and I Googled it, and Zulema's name came up. So, not 100%, but I would put it at about 99.999% that this was an outbound text to Zulema. All right. And this was, in my opinion, her most significant contribution. I personally believe the motive here was to put herself at the forefront of these characters. She really craved a sense of importance. She steps up right away, like, I am called by God to protect Lori, even though Lori doesn't even know me. And so I think that was the intention here. But in my opinion, with this exchange, or these series of exchanges, she, again, in my opinion, she really kicked off the madness. So, okay. All right. So Lori says, "Hey, pretty girl." She's replying to Zulema. I think Zulema had asked how she was doing. She did that a lot when she needed Lori to reply. "We are hanging in there. Just finished clearing the world today." I mean, she just cleared the whole world. And it's such a big deal, or it's a big deal. You were there every day, part with me. So that doesn't even make sense. But again, par for the course. "We are learning and growing in our powers every day. How are you?" Zulema replies, "I'm good. I'm starting to travel to the terrestrial realm at the temple now, although today I had a very different experience. And I had the feeling that something may happen to one of your family members." And how does Lori reply? "Call me!" 2 exclamation marks. I mean, Lori's excitement is almost palpable through these text messages. There were some other exchanges, and then Zulema followed up and said, "I will go in spirit when the bomb goes off, and I'll be there to see JJ's spirit to go to the presence of the Lord." Okay, so one thing I want to say about that is, and I've said this before, I absolutely do not believe Melanie Gibb when she said that JJ was deemed a dark spirit or a zombie right before she visited. If Melanie Gibbs' lips are moving, she's most likely lying. Same with Melanie Pawlowski and Zulema. I haven't even been able to make it through Zulema's, but her interview with the detectives because it's just such an exercise in frustration. But you can see here, this is May 29th. So Zulema's not establishing this for the first time. I mean, you can tell in this interaction, she just knew JJ was going to die, and she's letting Lori know, because and there are other interaction. It's about this bomb. So they seem to believe that this bomb was going to go off, this spiritual bomb, and these different people, including JJ, Tylee, and Charles, in my opinion, and eventually Tammy, that they were going to die. We also can deduce that by the affidavit of probable cause that came out of Idaho. According to it, they have some kind of evidence. We don't know what it is, but they started planning Tammy's murder. The earliest date that they listed was October 1st, 2018. So that's interesting because Chad and Lori didn't even meet until the 26th. So I do wonder if they had interactions online before they actually met in person. We also know from Melanie Gibb, who was the author of the Reddit email, that supposedly sometime in September, I think it was like September 22nd, maybe, that according to her, Jason Mao gave Lori to Chad. And so there was something going on behind the scenes, but I do believe that Lori and Chad actually met in person for the first time, October 26th, by his disgusting love story. Okay, so but also, so it listed that they started planning Tammy's murder as early as October 1st, and Tylee and JJ's murders as early as October 26th. So this was not, Melanie makes it sound like, yeah, it's just the weirdest thing. Like, I just thought I was, coming in to hang out and go to this conference. And then Lori's like, hey, plot twist, JJ is also a zombie now. I don't believe that. I think she's just trying to save her own peach. Okay, so then I and the angels will protect the bodies and not allow them to be possessed by evil. I don't believe that actually included Tylee, because in their minds, Tylee was a dark spirit. She was almost as dark as Joe. So why would she protect someone who was a dark spirit? Anyone who was rated a 4D and above, according to Chad, had actually made contracts with the other side. Well, a contract can't really be broken. And he said they rarely switch sides. Now, JJ did, but there's no evidence that they ever thought that Tylee was going to switch sides. Anyway, then I and the angels will protect the bodies and not allow them to be possessed by evil. Lori, perfect. I found out there are 4. There is a level 4 entity. His name is, and I've talked about this before, I just think it's, the content isn't hilarious, but the fact that she named Charles, or the dark spirit, Hiplos, but then makes the point that the H is silent is just like so ridiculous. As like Hiplos had a Cockney accent. And also, this flies in the face of both Melanie and Zulema's claims that all of like the dark ratings and all of like the zombie names and stuff like that, they are on Lori's side. They're trying to help Lori. So they say, oh, this all came from Chad. It did not, because Chad was Googling Hiplos after Lori already told Zulema his name. And there was another incident with one of the other spirit names. I can't think of it off the top of my head. That is a function of some of the meds I've been on, but it'll come to me. But he was a childhood friend of Charles, and I shared this in Cool Cats. But here's Chad searching for Ned Schneider. And here's Chad searching one day for Ned Snyder, who died in 1996, I think it was. And then, like, the next day, he updates his search to Ned Schneider, who died in, I think it was 1997. So this guy had no idea what was going on. And those are two of the names. And I also suspect that Garrett came from Lori as well. But anyway, okay. So Zulema says, I encapsulated them with invisible, hidden capsules that will close and capture them as soon as the bomb goes off and they leave the body. I also created a safe path guarded by warrior angels for Jonas to come and bind them and take them away as soon as they exit the body, which, I mean, that does not, she's trying to make this sound like a positive. That does not sound like a positive experience at all. I mean, all of it is absolute insanity. But so she follows up. She's quite full of herself. I have a good feeling of this. And she said, I saw myself protecting the body. So again, I mean, she has a solid pattern here. She is the protector. She protects Lori. She protects the victims who are going to die, who she actually predicted were going to die. Now, I'm sure that they picked up on Lori's desire to have these family members out of her life. And also, obviously, Tammy needed to be removed from the picture because Chad felt like the Lord told him he couldn't divorce. So anyway, so I think all of these friends of Lori, and they just all lie. They just lie through all the interviews. But okay, so Lori said, I think Zulema had asked her about going to a conference. And Lori said, I would love it, but I'm out of town. This is after she had left Charles. She was back and forth between Arizona, Idaho, and Hawaii. And yeah, she actually visited Chad for the first time during this whole time. So anyway, and then also Texas at one point. But anyway, so she was just all over the place. But she said, I'm not going to be at the conference, but thought it was important to my friendship with Melanie. She's talking about Melanie Gibb, to go to Utah with her. And she does go. I know this from a confidential source from 2020 had told me 2020, the year, not the ridiculous show. And yeah, so this person had told me that Melanie and Lori, in fact, Lori flew from Hawaii, I think. I think this was the trip. This might not have been the trip, but anyway, they went to Utah together. This was also the conference where Chad was supposed to speak, but then they announced that he had a family emergency. But according to the FOIA docs, he was in Utah. So he and Lori were in Utah, close to where this Preparing a People conference was happening, but they were in their own hotel room doing their own thing, which I do not want to think about. Okay. Let's see, where was I? All right. I'm hoping to have a reason soon to have to go back to Texas. Working on that now. Of course, she's talking about Charles being dead. I'm told he can't stay in there more than 5 days. Okay, well, this was May 30th, so obviously he stayed in there for more than 5 days. But even Chad had to concede that it's harder than you would think to get a spirit to leave its body. So it has been 2. I'm told our time bomb is in effect and it's only a matter of time and circumstance. And then Lori also said, I've also found out that, some other great info, and your revelation yesterday about hidden entities and deeply hidden entities was the key, multiple exclamation marks. Again, you are amazing, Zulema. Now, why does she think Zulema is so amazing? I think it goes back to Zulema saying, I had a feeling that something may happen to one of your family members. So Lori follows up, I just love you so much. And this is a rare moment where I actually agree with Lori. I could not do all of this without you. Let's talk on the phone tonight if you can, probably after 8. So that's the intro to Zulema. All right, let me get a drink. Now, let's talk about some of her lies. And also, in my opinion, law enforcement's help with these lies. Okay, so this comes from her interview with these different detectives. Pay special attention to this guy. He's from Fremont County. I think his name is Detective Kaaiakamanu. Anyway, he's the one prior. He couldn't pronounce his name and really botched it. Detective Hermosillo is primarily answering the questions, but you'll see Detective Kaaiakamanu, in my opinion, really kind of assist Zulema in coming up with a story that makes her look like, or tries to make her look like, less of a liar. Okay. I'm just going to rewind it.
In your statement, you said you had only met Lori a couple of times before she moved.
Obviously, that was a lie. I mean, she was hanging out with her all the time. Lori was staying in her home. And so clearly that was a lie. But there's more.
And you hadn't seen Lori since she moved a few months ago, and you didn't think Lori was married.
Okay. So it might be a little hard to hear, but he hits on 3 points. One, that she had only met Lori a couple of times, and that is very easily established as a lie. But then also, he said that she said in December when she was interviewed, this was when Alex woke up dead. I think it was, what day was that? December 12th, I think, the 11th or 12th. She said that she hadn't seen Lori since she moved a few months ago. Well, she moved to Idaho in September. So I'm not just being obsessive here. This is a really important point because they were interviewing her in December. So for her to say she hadn't seen Lori since she had moved a few months before, that was her statement. And that's what Detective Hermosillo is trying to get to the truth of. Zulema says, I don't remember saying that. So she's spinning. She doesn't know how to get out of this. She has a limited use immunity agreement, and those are usually predicated on the requirement that they have to tell investigators the truth. Now, that wouldn't have been, she still could have lied to Gilbert. At least that's my understanding. I have no legal training, but that was before, most likely before the immunity agreement was in place. And the immunity agreement is with Idaho, not with Arizona. So she's spinning.
Let's look at those statements. When I say look at them, just look at them carefully there for a second.
Okay, and this, again, this is Detective Kaaiakamanu from Fremont County.
You didn't think Lori was married, right? Did you know she was married at that point?
First of all, he asked a leading question. Like, you didn't think Lori was married, right? And so I take issue with that. Not horrible, but not the best. I mean, just ask a question. Did you think Lori was married? And you see Zulema trying to pick up what he's putting down here.
Yeah, I did know that she was married. Yeah, because she had sent me pictures of when she had gotten married. So yeah, I did know that. I mean, I didn't.
Now she walks it back.
Let me put it this way. I saw the pictures of them on the beach. Her dressed in white, him dressed in white, and they were dancing and kissing.
Right, we've seen all the pictures.
Right. So I assumed, it was assumed that that was happening.
So now she's trying to bend her testimony to his suggestion, like, well, I didn't actually know for sure, but they sent me pictures of them on the beach. She's in white, he's in white, they're wearing wedding ring. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. She knew why they were going to Hawaii. They have interactions about it. So, but that she, I'm sure, didn't read back through all of her interactions. So she's just like flying blind here. She's trying to accommodate his suggestions, in my opinion.
When you told him, what else did she say in that statement that she hadn't talked to him in a while? What was that statement about?
That you only met Lori a few times.
Well, obviously, that's inconsistent with what she told you guys.
That you hadn't seen her since she moved a few months ago. And that you didn't think Lori was married.
What's the timing of hadn't seen her since she left a few months ago? Is there any explanation of that?
Okay, first of all, again, it might sound like I'm really picking on him, but he doesn't need a breakdown of the timeline here. He knows that she was interviewed in December. So her statement was she hadn't seen Lori since she moved a few months ago. So he doesn't need Zulema to break, or anyone else to break it down for him. A few months ago, that's going to be, around September. And they left on August 31st. They arrived in Rexburg on September 1st. So it's weird that he's even like kind of fishing here, but in my opinion, it gets worse.
Was there any timeline on that? Was there any clarification?
Well, we know Zulema had gone up there.
Right.
Okay, so Detective Hermosillo, let me take note of this. I'm going to bounce to the next slide so that you understand what he's talking about. He shows his hand. He's like, we know that Zulema went up there. And that was something that I found however many months ago in the FOIA docs. And that, I'm not going to read this whole interaction, but she arrived on September 15th and left on the 17th. Now, she didn't stay with Lori, because she's not one of their kids. Everyone else who came, and we'll talk more about that, but everyone else who came, it appears that they stayed with Lori. We don't really know that for sure, but we do know with Zulema, she stayed in a hotel. But you can see, Lori is excited to see Zulema that day. Then also Lori it says to Zulema that this is from Chad. Please have Zulema send a message to me that she's in Rigby and wanted to see if I could come listen to her talk tonight about her trip to Chile. So she went to Chile to visit her family right after Charles was shot. But at this point, Chad is still married to Tammy, so he needs a cover story. So he needs Zulema to text him that she's in Rigby so that, he can dismount from his ball and chain in his mind, his little spot under the stairs, and come and hang out with them. And then on the 17th, anytime you see sent, this is Zulema. And she said, it was very powerful in the temple today. It was so much fun to be with all of you this weekend. Now I just have to wait until the Lord says it's time for me to go. So you can see she's definitely thinking she's going to move to Idaho. All right, let me find the spot here.
in your statement.
Just a second. Let me fast forward. I think it was
No,
about here.
Zulema had gone up there.
Right.
So she's saying that since she
I wonder if she's talking about since they moved to Idaho or to Hawaii. That's what I'm wondering about.
Okay, that is ridiculous. First of all, they didn't move to Hawaii. They fled to Hawaii. Secondly, they fled to Hawaii just a couple weeks before Zulema, or a few weeks before Alex died and Zulema was interviewed. So that wouldn't have been a few months ago. That would have been a few weeks ago. So you could tell he's trying to jam this square peg into a round hole. And this is a pretty solid pattern with law enforcement with these different players. And I will say, with the exception of Detective Hermosillo, in my opinion.
She hadn't seen him since they moved to Hawaii.
well, that could be,
That's what I'm trying to find out.
that could be, but she said that she didn't know what state Lori and Chad lived in. So those are the type of things that defense is really gonna probably ask you.
So I didn't, when they left,
And now she pulls a Melanie, Gibb and Pawlowski. She just starts talking and talking and talking because she sees now she has an opportunity to talk her way out of this.
Rexford, they didn't tell anybody where they
Okay.
when they left Rexford, they didn't tell anybody where they were going.
And that also isn't true. I'll share this in another live, but Melanie Pawlowski, again, they weren't like lining up their stories, but she admitted to knowing that they were in Hawaii.
Not even even Alex was trying to find out where they were at, and he had asked them where they were at, and they wouldn't disclose where they were at.
So he essentially, so they never circle back to, hey, you said that you hadn't seen Chad and Lori since Lori moved to Idaho a few months ago. And Detective Hermosillo's point is a salient one. Like, she is going to be absolutely eviscerated on cross by Pryor. Because he's going to challenge all of these details and inconsistencies. And Pryor has access to a lot more than what we have access to in the FOIA docs, though we do have access to quite a bit. Okay. But something I just discovered when I started digging into the case again, she also met with Lori and Chad when they were coming back from their honeymoon. This was really like, I'm not trying to overstate it. I just, you think with this case, like, you can't be surprised. And then something like this happens. So this, I'm actually going to read the interaction. I think it's all relevant. So it starts on November 13th. First of all, this was the first time that I personally found out that they returned from their honeymoon on November 14th. So we didn't know when they returned from their honeymoon. We knew when they left, but I haven't seen anything in the FOIA docs until I came across this that indicated when they return. Like, there's no screenshot of like their flights and things like that. And one thing that's interesting was that in the very first dateline, Keith actually made a reference to when they returned in mid-November. And that was long before any of these FOIA docs were released. So I do kind of wonder in the back of my mind if Kay knew when they returned from their honeymoon, because she did say that, you know, they had hired a private investigator and they were doing their own investigation, meaning, you know, she, Larry, Brandon, Jess, you know, her husband, their little cadre. So anyway, okay, so this is November 13th. Zulema says to Lori, so they clearly had set this up, like, you know, most likely over, like, they talked, because she's just following up with her. she said, "Hey, love, at what time will you be here tomorrow?" So we know that, immediately I was just like, wait a minute. They met up on the 14th? Okay. Zulema says, "I can cancel a case and move another to meet you guys for lunch. I have so much to tell you." Well, first of all, I mean, this is just another example. Zulema is always ready, always available at a moment's notice. She can cancel, a cuddle time, reschedule it, and she has so much to tell them. Now, I'm sure this might not be fair, but from reading all of their interactions, I would imagine that Lori was like, "Oh, great. Yeah, we don't really want to spend our entire layover hearing all of her crazy stories." But Lori said, "I think we will get in about noon, and then our other flight is not until 6 p.m. So they have approximately a 6-hour layover. Could you meet us for dinner, maybe? Early, like at 4. So, here they're getting in at noon, but they don't want to meet with Zulema until 4. So you can tell they're like, okay, let's just kind of keep this short. Well, in my mind, I'm thinking, why in the world are they meeting with Zulema? I mean, here they are, they're coming back from their honeymoon. They have all these irons in the fire. And while they were gone, the Jeep, the Rexburg police came and took their Jeep and left behind, a warrant. And, so there was quite a bit going on. I'm sure Melanie was freaking out because she had just moved to Rexburg, gotten there on the first, and now, or first or second. And then Lori takes off and she's gone half the month. And then all of these things, the Rexburg police come by her apartment. They're asking her questions. So there's a lot going on. And yet they prioritize meeting with Zulema at the around the Mesa airport. So I suspect that they planned a longer layover. Maybe not. Maybe that's a standard layover with a smaller airport like Mesa, but it was important to them to meet with Zulema, but for it to be a pretty short meeting because, if they're meeting at 4 and then they're having dinner and their flight leaves at 6, I mean, obviously Mesa is a small airport, so it's not like, checking in at JFK. However, they still have to, go back through security and all of that. So they didn't leave a lot of time to meet with her. Okay. So excuse me. Uh, so all right, yeah, so we get in not until or our other flight is not until 6 p.m. Could you meet us for dinner? Maybe early at 4. What does your day look like tomorrow? We don't want to interrupt what you have going on. Of course they do. This is just lip service. Zulema, yes, perfect. 4 p.m. is perfect. It'll work out. Or I'll work it out. So then Zulema follows up. We're calling them spiritually to do work with us, Mel and Alex. So who knows what that is about. Lori, okay, perfect. So excited to see you, my beautiful sister. So now she's her beautiful sister because in just a couple weeks' time, she's going to marry her not so handsome brother. And Zulema, me too. Zulema, where do you want to meet? Lori, probably close to the Mesa airport, like Ray and Power. I'll call you tomorrow when we are in and we can figure it out. Is that good? And then she corrects herself. It's close, not lose. Zulema, that's perfect. I'll be close by that area at that time. And then Lori, yay. Zulema, I saw a Mongolian, Vietnamese, wings, and Mexican restaurant on Power and Ready. What do you want to meet? Well, I mean, these are texts. So, Lori, can you come pick us up at the 4 Points Hotel by the Mesa Airport? Now, one little piece of information about the 4 Points Hotel, and I warned you this was going to be a very, very deep dive. This was Lori and Chad's go-to hotel. When Lori took off after the big blow up with Charles on January 30th, this was the hotel she went to. When she went and visited Chad in Idaho, this is when Tammy was still alive, then they came back to Phoenix together, and they stayed at this hotel. So they have like this kind of homing device that, it's just what's comfortable for them. They frequently fly into the Mesa airport and then they stay at this hotel. It's on Williams Field and Power. We got a room for a little bit to sleep. We are up now and are so excited to see you. Then we can eat on Power and Ray, question mark, question mark. Of course, Zulema, I'll text you when I'm on the way. Lori, perfect, thanks. Can't wait to see Zulema, can't wait to see you. Lori, me too. We are in room 505. So come up when you get here. And of course, we can give you a blessing before we go. So, and then Zulema, I'm on my way. My GPS says ETA was in 10 minutes. So that would have been about 4:20 on November 14th. Lori, perfect. I'll see you soon. So when she told investigators that she hadn't seen Lori since she moved to Idaho, there were two lies in that. One, she went to Idaho and obviously saw both Lori and Chad, but then she also had this meetup. Okay, so before I share my theory, I also want to share this bag of cash that I think plays into this, at least in my theory. So I'm going to play this. And it's as insane as everything else. I think she is just absolutely lying out her peach. Okay.
So let's talk about the bag of cash. Do you remember when he gave that to you?
He didn't necessarily give it to me. He just a couple of days before he passed. I don't know if it was like 1 day or 2 days before he passed. He said to me, Melanie, if anything happens to me, I want you to know that there is money in a bag in the closet, and it's for you. He said, it's not much, but it's for you.
Okay. And did you ever count the money that was in there? Or how much was in it?
Well, when before he passed away, no, because I just said whatever, you know what I mean? I wasn't gonna touch his money, but
Of course, because she just has so much integrity.
after he passed away, I asked the police to bring it down, and
Okay, she makes the point that she asked the police to bring it down. Now, in my opinion, I mean, she was very upset that the police were there. She said that they were upsetting her daughter and her son, that they have anxiety. She wanted them to leave, and they came with a warrant. So they had every right to be there. And when they were there, I think for her to tell them about the bag of cash, in my opinion, I think she was getting in front of it. I think she knew that that would look really suspicious. And so she actually lets them know about this bag of cash in her closet. I mean, what would it be doing in her closet? Well, anyway, so she tells them about this bag of cash in her closet and asks them to bring it down.
my daughter and her boyfriend started counting.
Okay, so Detective Hermosillo asked her if she counted the money, and you would expect most parents to protect their kids. Kara was still young; she had just graduated high school in May, and instead, Zulema makes them both witnesses. Her claim is that she just suffered from this deplorable lack of curiosity. She didn't care how much money was in this bag. And Kara and her boyfriend counted the money. So again, I mean, making them, potential witnesses. If this case had become criminal, obviously that wasn't a big concern. But okay, I'm going to rewind it a little bit.
Boyfriend started counting.
And how much?
I think that it must have been about probably between $5,000 and $7,000 or something like that.
So here she pulls a Melanie Gibb. She's reading the room. she kind of throws out these numbers. She's acting like, I mean, how could I possibly remember how much money was in this bag? So she throws out these numbers, not knowing how much Detective Hermosillo might know. Because when they're interviewed, they don't know how much someone else has told them. So, she and Melanie Gibb, also, we don't even know much about Melanie Pawlowski's interviews because those weren't shared in any of the FOIA docs. But in her case, one of the detectives actually noted that she lied. We'll get to that, or that they knew she was lying. But here's Zulema throwing out 5 to 7,000, floating that to see if that spaghetti sticks, and she wasn't challenged on it. So my suspicion is that it was more than 5 to 7,000.
Do you remember what else was in the bag?
She's struggling.
I still have that.
She said, very in a whisper, "I still have the bag."
Do you still have everything that was in it?
Yeah.
Do you remember what it was?
It was a bag.
Here she
He
goes.
had it in a plastic bag, like a Ziploc bag. And,
Sure, the money was in his pocket bag?
mhm,
In another bag?
yeah.
Okay.
And,
I mean, who cares? He's asking what was in the bag, and she's like, "So it was in a plastic bag, and that was in another bag." I mean, she is treading water.
yeah. I've looked through that thing like I don't know how many times enough for the life of me. I can't remember what's in
Yeah, weird.
there.
It goes on more, but Detective Hermosillo is like, was there a gun? Was there, I mean, it gets kind of crazy, but I really just kind of want to focus on the bag of cash and tie-in. So, all right, here's my theory. I strongly suspect, I mean, we don't know what happened. So I'm just positing this as a theory. I strongly suspect that Lori and Chad would have never chosen to meet up with Zulema when they were dealing with so much stress and just coming back to their honeymoon. I suspect that there was a bag of cash handoff. They couldn't, at this point, they were becoming slightly more criminally sophisticated, and they knew that they couldn't just send her a Venmo. They couldn't just transfer money to her account, but they weren't going to see her. She wasn't coming up to Idaho. There was a lot going on. And I suspect that they handed off a bag of cash. And in return, Zulema helped Alex move on to his 6th probation. So, okay, next up, Melanie. All right, so let's talk about Melanie's visit to the Berg. Now, this is supremely interesting to me. So, back in 2020, a confidential source had told me that Melanie visited Rexburg September 26th to the 29th. I shared this calendar in another live, and you see, I mean, September was a jam-packed month for Lori. They rolled into Rexburg September 1st. Then I believe that Tylee was murdered on the 8th. I personally believe JJ was murdered on the 22nd. They were both buried the 9th and the 23rd. So less than a week after Tylee was buried on Chad's property, Zulema comes into town. So she's there from the 15th to the 17th, which we already talked about. She leaves. Melanie Gibb comes in the 18th. David Warwick joins her the 19th. through the 23rd. They have a couple days off. This was Tylee's 17th birthday. Not that Lori would have cared, but then the 26th, according to the source, Melanie came into Rexburg and left on the 29th. Well, I was looking for something else in the FOIA docs. And some of these things, I'm really surprised I didn't see them because I did read through these FOIA docs. But a lot of times what I would do is I would start cross-referencing. Like I would read something and I would, think, oh, okay, it was almost like a game of memory. Where have I read something like this? And I start cross-referencing. So I suspect that there were times that when I came back to the original document, I must not have gone back to the same page because it makes no sense to me that I would have just missed this. But I found evidence of this trip in the Gilbert police report. This I'm actually going to read all 3 paragraphs, and then I'm going to break down the timeline day by day because I think it's really important. Between October of 2018 and October of 2019, Alex, Lori, and Chad identified Brandon Boudreaux as a dark soul. Lori had extensive communication with Melanie Lee Boudreaux Pawlowski, which resulted in Melanie and Brandon's separation and divorce. On September 17th, Brandon provided Melanie with his new rental address per Melanie's request. So, I mean, you like overlay that with everything else that was going on in September. I mean, this is when Melanie asked Brandon for his address. So, they're planning. I mean, they haven't even, and I don't mean to be cavalier, but I have to get through this presentation, but they haven't even murdered JJ yet. And I believe that Melanie was already like, okay, all right, let's get on with this. So, all right, where's your new place going to be? So that was the 17th. Brandon provided Melanie with his new rental address per Melanie's request. That address was known to a few people. Only Melanie had relations with the offender. So that sounds that's written a little weird, but I think they meant relationship. Between September 26th and September 29th, Melanie visited Lori and Alex in Idaho. So ding, 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 the 26th through the 29th. And like I said, I shared this in another live sometime in 2021, I think. But okay, where was I? Okay, Melanie flew back to Arizona on September 29th. Between September 25th and September 30th. So this is the day before Melanie flies in and the day after she leaves. Alex, Lori, and Chad prepared for Brandon's murder. Okay, so I just have to stop right there. I mean, I read this. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I mean, what do they think Melanie was doing? Obviously, they're all in town, so I don't think that there are a lot of text messages going on. There are things that they can pin Alex, Lori, and Chad down with, but there are hardly any details about Melanie's interactions throughout this entire police report. So you'll see how ridiculous it gets. But here they're saying, yeah, Alex, Lori, and Chad, they prepared for Brandon's murder. I mean, Melanie, she was just there to visit, Yellowstone, eat potato donuts or whatever people do when they visit Idaho. So they just leave Melanie out of the mix as if like it's just kind of this academic, like I'm just noting, yeah, she was there between the 26th and 29th. But anyway, so, and even if we suspend reality for a minute and say, yeah, Melanie probably wasn't involved in any of this preparation. I mean, the fact that they're like Alex, Lori, and Chad prepared for Brandon's murder. I mean, I'm like, okay, so why aren't there any charges? Okay. Some of those preparations included the involved Jeep Wranglers window tinting, And again, I actually looked up each of the dates for everything, and I'll go into it. The removal of the Jeep's back seat, the removal of the Jeep's back wheel, the rental of a storage unit where the Jeep's wheel and seat were stored. So this pretty much solidifies the entire reason Lori got that storage unit. It was to hide the Jeep back seat and the wheel. So I think they were pretty paranoid, thinking like at any minute, because at this point, both of the kids were dead. So they didn't know when someone could possibly, ask for a welfare check or, so I think they were very, very paranoid about just having this back seat and wheel in either of their garages. And that was the primary reason they got the storage unit. Okay. Alex going to the shooting range and the use of throwaway phones by Chad and Alex. On the evening of September 30th, Alex drove the Jeep Wrangler from Rexburg, Idaho, and arrived near Gilbert, Arizona on October 1st at approximately 19:30. Okay, so put that time away in your mind, 7:30 p.m. So he arrived in Gilbert. But we kind of have to back up here for a minute, because since the shooting was on October 2nd, I had assumed that he left Idaho on the 1st, but he didn't. He left on September 30th. So basically, I mean, Melanie leaves, and then the next day, Alex leaves, and which I find very strange. I actually wonder. Well, anyway, no, I'll get to that more in a minute. All right, on October 2nd at approximately 7:18, so this was in the morning, Alex looked up directions to Brandon's rental address while parked approximately 2 miles away. We will circle back to that. At approximately 7:15 hours, Brandon left his residence with his children. At approximately 7:19, Alex drove to Brandon's address and parked outside, where he awaited for approximately 118 minutes. Okay, let's dig into this timeline. Okay, so on the 23rd, Brandon signed the lease agreement. It says the lease agreement showed the lease began on September 23rd. Now, we don't know if he moved in that day. He might have moved in the next day, but it was, I mean, this was he signed the lease agreement on the day JJ was being buried. Obviously, he didn't know that, but it just, I'm going to make these points, as uncomfortable as they are, just to show just the velocity of these crimes. When you see the timeline point by point, you see like they are just like, they're ready to move on to the next murder even before the other ones are accomplished. Brandon was shot at in the front of his residence on October 2nd. Brandon also provided a screen captured image of a text message from Melanie Boudreau dated 9/17. Melanie asked Brandon for his new address, to which he replied by providing his address. I actually share a map, and I obfuscate it, but there is, I did find at one point in the FOIA doc, his address was left unredacted. So I redact it, but I do know like where his where his house actually was. Okay. So 2 days later, Alex's phone pinged inside Chad's house for about 17 minutes. So it says, per your request, I checked the visits by Alex to Chad's house again. There were only 4 visits by Alex during the month of September. These were on 9/6. So this was a pretty short visit. This was pretty soon, not too long before Tylee was murdered. 9/9, this is when Tylee was buried on the property. 9/23, this is when JJ was buried on the property. And 9/25. So here, JJ was just buried 2 months before. And then here's Alex at Chad's house from 10:05 in the morning. So Tammy was at work until 10:22. And 17 minutes seems to be like the magic number for Alex. But during the 2 visits on 9/6 and 9/25, all the pings were in and around the house. So this one and this one, they were in and around the house. And there were no pings anywhere in the backyard, near the fire pit or pond. As you can see, these visits were also short, about 11 minutes and 17 minutes, like the one on 9/23. So the visit on 9/9 was the only long visit, approximately 2.5 hours. This is allegedly when Tylee was buried. Well, we don't have to say. I'll just throw in the allegedly. So, okay. So that was on 9/25. Now we don't know. But it's probably safe to assume he got the windows tinted after this meeting, because this meeting was pretty early in the morning. But at some point, and during that day, it says Alex was confirmed to be in possession of Charles' Jeep Wrangler in Rexburg, Idaho. Alex took the Jeep to Dan's window tinting and had the front windows tinted to 20% and rear windows tinted to 5%. The percentage level relates to the amount of light that passes through the window tinting. And we know from one of the documents, maybe it was the affidavit of probable cause, that he got the maximum amount of tinning allowable by law. So that was the 25th. Now, Melanie flies in on the 26th. So on 9/26, Melanie flew from Mesa, Arizona to Idaho Falls, Allegiant Airlines, yada, yada, departed at 12:31. She arrived at about 3:25 in the afternoon. Also, at some point on the 26th, it says on the same date, Alex activated his throwaway phone, and they, of course, redact the number in Rexburg, Idaho. The phone number also utilized Alex's Gmail account. So, I mean, again, these are not sophisticated criminals. He gets a burner phone and then logs into his Gmail account. And I think probably to be able to use Google Maps, because he probably had a bunch of addresses saved in any regard. Like, you kind of thwart the purpose of a burner phone when you log in to a verified account. But that's what he did. So then this was interesting. So this is the benefit to kind of keeping a timeline of some of these events, because at times when I find out some of these events, they seem so out of place. Like, okay, someone's device pinged at the Walmart by Chad's house. Why do we care? I don't know, but they obviously cared because it was included in the FOIA doc. And so the way that these maps work is they'll set these bookends, like a beginning time and an end time, and then they correlate it with movement of someone's device, and sometimes also phone calls. And so obviously they're trying to figure out, like, who's involved with what, who's helping. They're just trying to find correlations. So anyway, so at some point, someone's device pinged at the Walmart, and this was between 21:52 and 22:16. So later at night, that's what 9:52 to I think 10:16, and then later between 11:31 and 12:06 the next morning, we see that Lori was on the move. So somewhere in the FOIA docs, it had said that the red dots, and this is the cell tower, and there's this element of directionality with these cell towers. So that's why they're pointing a certain direction. I don't know. I mean, I'm just passing on what I'm trying to figure out, and they make a point here. Total number of geolocation points found, 1. But I noticed that this here, this looked like latitude and longitude points. So I actually looked these up like, you can do a search using these latitude and longitude points. And so I looked it up, and it actually came within 10 feet of Alex's apartment. So there was something that caught their curiosity, that at 11:33, so this is pretty early in this time range, someone's device was at Alex's apartment. And then you also see that there are 2 outgoing calls, but they redact who is making the calls and who they are made to. Okay. All right. Okay, so September 28th, Alex visited a gun range in Rexburg. Now, keep in mind, Melanie is still there, and Alex is getting ready for his big day. And it says on 9/28, Alex went to the Unified Sportsman's Gun Club in Rexburg. Alex signed the gun club's log and was confirmed to be shooting on the range. He wasn't even a legal possessor. Like, he wasn't legally permitted to even own weapons. I made that point and provided the proof for that. One of the analysts, I think it was that Elizabeth Keller, actually chased that down. So anyway, and then on the 29th, we know Melanie flew back to Arizona. Here are the details of her flight. And Alex's, most likely his, cell phone, was near the Idaho Falls airport at approximately 15:05. So it looks like Lori didn't even drop her off at the airport. I mean, I don't know what Lori had going on, but it doesn't look like she was the one who took Melanie to the airport. Okay, so that was the 29th. Again, Alex, we already know Alex left on the 30th. And this is why I suspect he left on the 30th. On October 1st, Brandon and Melanie closed on their home. And if you've ever been involved in a closing, any number of things can go wrong. So I've closed on 4 homes, and sometimes documents don't come in time, or there's some kind of issue with the loan or the bank or the notary. I mean, any number of issues can happen. So I wonder, and this is really just throwing spaghetti against the wall, but I wonder if originally Alex was supposed to shoot Brandon on the 1st, because Melanie needed Brandon alive to help close on the home. Otherwise, this just would have been caught up in probate court, and that can take a long time before your funds are released. So, she knew that, in my opinion, she knew that he needed to stay alive through the closing. But then I wonder if, potentially the closing got pushed back, or maybe, Alex was tracking Brandon and he just couldn't get the shot. Maybe there were too many people around. We don't know. We might find out in one of these trials. I would love to see a trial for the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux, but there doesn't seem to be any inclination to do that. Okay. Also on the 1st, Alex had multiple conversations with Chad, and Lori embarrassed herself. I mean, really embarrassed herself. Okay. So on October 1st at 6:52, the Jeep Wrangler was, and probably headed westbound on Interstate 40 near Holbrook, Arizona. I think, if I remember correctly, that's about 3 hours outside of Phoenix. So at 9:19, Alex's throwaway phone called Chad's throwaway phone while located near Holbrook, Arizona. So this is their first conversation that we know of. At 11:55, Alex's throwaway phone received a call from Chad's throwaway phone. Actually, I take that back. We don't know if they talked. He could have called him and Chad didn't pick up, and maybe Chad called him back. I really just want to stick to the facts as closely as possible and not add to them. At 11:55, Alex's throwaway phone received a call from Chad's throwaway phone while located northeast of the Phoenix metro area. And this is really eerie. This is obviously in the Gilbert police report. But they keep, throughout the police report, as they're like leading up to the attempted murder, they keep updating. This is approximately 21 hours prior to the attempted homicide of Brandon. They do it at least, I would say, like 3 times, maybe more. On October 1st at approximately 14:08 hours, Lori rented a storage unit at Self Storage Plus. Surveillance footage showed Lori was alone and Alex was not with her. So they're making that point, and I'm going to give my opinion why they're making that point. Additionally, and there's a pretty long redaction, throughout the day. So something is happening throughout the day, and they don't want us to know what it is, including at the Rexburg Temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, despite Alex not having a temple recommend. So I don't think I'm going too far out on a limb here in saying I think what Lori did was she had Alex leave his verified cell phone behind, because all of his interactions, all of his calls with Chad, they're both between Alex's throwaway phone that, he's still logged into, and Chad's throwaway phone. And I think the fact that they're saying like something's going on, but Alex didn't have a temple recommend. So why would they be making a point that Alex doesn't have a temple recommend? I think it's pretty safe to assume that Lori just either, kept Alex's phone in her purse and took his phone like different places, like basically taking him for a ride. And I think that she was trying to establish an alibi. And I'll circle back on this with another point where it definitely appears that she is trying to give Alex an alibi. But you see how, Lori probably thought this was just so clever. She sends him off with his, well, I shouldn't say she sends him off. He goes off with his burner phone that he logs into, which makes it not really a burner phone anymore. And she has his, verified phone. And anyway, so there is another reference to this phone. But so I think she probably thought she was being so clever, but it's still so criminally unsophisticated because he was caught on surveillance cameras, in Arizona, I think also maybe in Utah. So anyway, okay. Chad, okay, so now let me explain this screenshot here. So I saw this screenshot and I saw that there were these phone calls, one outgoing call, 2 incoming calls, but they had a legend and and they made the point that Melanie's dots were indicated in pink, and it is just this, bubblegum pink. And so anyway, so these dots appear to be one of Melanie's devices, a verified device. I added in a dot for Melanie's rental home and also Brandon's rental home. This is the home where he was shot at. So it was a couple blocks north of this point here and just a tiny bit to the west. So that's why I have it up here. You don't see dots near his home, but that doesn't mean that they didn't possibly swing by his home. It just means that it wasn't included in the pings to this cell tower. And again, this is, if I understand all of this correctly, this is what's going on. Oops. And again, we have these bookends. This is October 1st. So this is, the evening before Brandon is shot at, from 7:31 to 19:48. Okay, so that's 7:30 to 7:48. So now having having explained that, there's one other thing I need to explain. So I was curious, and again, I threw a lot of spaghetti at the wall, and every once in a while, a noodle sticks. So I was just curious if I could correlate anything else with these times. So I searched 1931, I searched 731, and then I searched also searched 1731 with no colon. And I was searching across all of the FOIA docs, and I got a hit. So this came from the first, I think the first Chandler FOIA doc release, but this came from the Gilbert police report. And, again, this, I mean, is it 100% that this correlates with this? No, but it's pretty close unless someone else was also calling at these hours. So I always try to be as careful as possible, but I was quite delighted when I saw not only 1931 but also 1948. So I feel reasonably confident that this does correlate. So now let's read this. On October 1st, between 7:31 and 7:48. Now remember, I had said, like, take note that it was noted that Alex rolled into Gilbert at 7:30. It was 19:30. So this is 1 minute later. This happened. So between 1931 and 1948, Alex's throwaway phone communicated with Chad's throwaway phone. So now we know, I think it's reasonable to assume that this redaction is talking about Alex's and Chad's communications, even though these are most likely Melanie's pings, because they do make the point. I might not have included it in here. I didn't, but they actually made the point that Melanie's, the cell tower in pink refers to Melanie's pings throughout the month of October. Okay, so because Lori visited her in October. So, I just kind of tucked that away. Like, okay, so, Melanie's pretty in pink. Okay. Alex's throwaway phone, and then, there are some redactions. Gilbert, Arizona, during those calls. So it sounds like they included the phone number and said that he was in Gilbert, Arizona during those calls. That's safe to assume, because we had already read that he got to Gilbert, Arizona at 1930. At 1952, Alex's Gmail account, and they have his Gmail account, searched for, and they redact it, but then what they don't redact is Brandon Boudreaux's new rental address. So we know he searched for Brandon Boudreaux's new rental address. So at some point since arriving in Gilbert, is pretty safe to assume that he found out either from Melanie or from Chad Brandon's address. So, okay, the address that Melanie and a few others knew. And then, approximately 13 hours prior to the attempted homicide of Brandon. Again, I just find that so eerie. So it looks like, even though this isn't a finished product, they were correlating Chad and Alex's phone conversations with Melanie's movement. And I do find it interesting. They also have Charles Vallow here, but even though obviously he wasn't alive at this time. But here's Melanie's home, and I mean, one of these dots is really, really close. I mean, she pings, her device pings against the cell tower really close to her home. So I think it's somewhat reasonable to assume that Melanie and Alex may have met up at 7:30 as soon as he rolled into town, and maybe they were together and driving around. Now, this doesn't mean that they were only together between these hours. Again, this is 17 minutes. It's it's kind of weird how that 17 minutes comes up 3 times. But It just means that during these 17 minutes, her device, again, if I'm understanding all of this correctly, I'm not going to keep clarifying that, her device was pinging off of this cell tower. So if they moved outside of the perimeter of this particular cell tower, like if they, possibly came up to Brandon's home or went somewhere else, it wouldn't have been on this map, because when they include these screenshots of these maps, they only show one cell tower. Okay, so it looks like Melanie and Alex are together just hours before Alex shoots at Brandon. Again, if all of my assumptions are correct. Okay. And I make the point again, I just include the screenshot again, that Alex had just rolled into town or arrived near Gilbert, Arizona at approximately 7:30. Okay, on this day, and this I just pulled from the timeline, Lori sent Colby a Venmo payment. Now, I already had a live where I talked about Colby. I'm not trying to drag him under the bus here, but there were quite a few of these Venmo payments that correlated with some really shifty behavior. Like you see a correlation where, Tylee was murdered, and then when JJ was murdered, I'm implying that Colby knew about the murders, that he was involved, but you see, even if this was just on Lori's end, it sure appears like she's like, okay, all right, no, well, we need to keep Colby quiet, so let's send him money. Now that may not be correct. He might have asked her for money. We don't know. Okay, but I'm just noting it. And then October 2nd, we have the attempted shooting. Now I do, okay, so, all right, yeah, all of this is important. On October 2nd, between 7:17 and 7:18, Alex's Gmail account again searched for, and I'm sure this was Brandon's address, then searched for directions from his current location. At that time, Alex's, I'm sure this is throwaway phone, whatever, his location was near the LDS temple in Gilbert, and I'm going to dig into that in a minute, approximately 2 miles west of Brandon's address. At 7:19, Alex's throwaway phone traveled to Brandon's address and remained there until 9:17, approximately 118 minutes. So I'm going to dig into this because I think that it's easy to just read this and be like, whatever, lots of numbers and details, but that's kind of my stomping ground. So I think that there is an interesting point that I'll make in a minute. During that time frame, Alex's throwaway phone communicated with Chad's throwaway phone multiple times. So he's hanging out, waiting for, either waiting at the temple to go to Brandon's, or waiting at Brandon's house, and he is talking to Chad multiple times. Okay. Additionally, we don't know how many times, but multiple. Additionally, eyewitness accounts confirmed a dark-colored Jeep Wrangler with a Texas license plate, dark tinted windows, and no wheel affixed to the back was parked idling on the wrong side of the street immediately west of Brandon's address. Again, you're in a Jeep with dark windows. Your car is idling. You're in the burbs, and you're on the wrong side of the street. I mean, like one guy talked about, actually, out, he was just out walking his dog, and he thought it was weird. And one thing I will give Gilbert, and I'll circle back to this, hopefully, if I remember, but they actually did a legitimate investigation. They don't include a lot of details, especially when it comes to Melanie. And I think they give her way too much of a pass, which I'll talk about that in a minute. But they actually canvassed the neighborhood. And I talked about this in another live, but Chandler, there is no evidence that they talked to a single neighbor after Charles was killed. And I looked through the document for neighborhood, canvas, Yeah, and I read the entire police report, and there wasn't one reference to them talking to any neighbors. And you also see in the body cam footage, the one investigator very gruffly sending neighbors away, like, just like, "Who are you? Who are you? No, we're good." And he just sends them away. And there's no, like, he didn't send them to like a queue where someone else could ask them questions. He just sent them away. Like, we got this. Okay, from 9:19 hours through 9:25, Alex's throwaway phone. That I just got tired of copying and pasting throwaway phone. But traveled southbound away from Brandon's address and made 2 calls to Chad's throwaway phone. So, whoops, yes, it's so sensitive. Um, at 13:22 hours, Alex's, I'm sure, throwaway phone, traveled northbound through the Apache Reservation in eastern Arizona. So this is after the botched shooting in eastern Arizona, and received a call from Chad's throwaway phone. So they are just buddies. They're talking throughout this entire experience. At 1953 and 2012, Alex and Chad's throwaway phones communicated as Alex's throwaway phone continued northbound into Utah. And here you see Lori's a little smarter in terms of, a criminal mind, which isn't saying much, than Chad, because she's like, yeah, how about you talk to Chad? She didn't want any evidence besides, her own attempts to provide Alex with an alibi. But Chad just, he's just a, lovesick little puppy. And it's like, doop, 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 okay. At 20:42 hours, Alex and Chad's throwaway phones communicated for a final time near Green River, Utah. At 9:02, and this is 8:02, there's a difference between Mountain Daylight Time, Mountain Savings Time. Yeah. Alex's personal cell phone called and texted Lori's personal cell phone multiple times to include a 23-minute call. Now, it's a little weird that, they're including both, time frames, and there's a long redaction in here. But then, so I'm thinking this is a continuation, like the next morning, he calls, he like picked up his personal cell phone and then called her. But they clarify this correspondence occurred during the time frame Alex's throwaway phone was at Brandon's address. So this occurred the morning of October 2nd. And this was the second time it sure appears that Lori's like texting Alex's phone and, replying, and they, she even has a 23-minute call. And I think she thought that would be an adequate alibi. Okay. And again, through all of this, I could not find one detail of anyone communicating with Melanie. And I find that highly suspect because of details that we're going to get to in a minute. But I want to highlight this. I mean, it's like I said, it's easy to get kind of caught up in all of the numbers, but they make the point that at 7:19 in the morning, Alex's throwaway phone traveled to Brandon's address. So we don't know. We know that he, between 7:17 and 7:18, he searched again for Brandon's address, but this time, from his current location, and he was at the temple. So we don't know when he got to the temple, how long he was waiting at the temple. We just know that at that time he pulled up Brandon's address and searched for directions from the temple. And then a minute later, Alex's throwaway phone traveled, he began his travel to Brandon's address, and then he stayed there for just under 2 hours. And then I want to jump ahead to Brandon Boudreaux left his residence with his 4 children at approximately 7:25. So I looked up. Oh no. Do I not have? Shoot. I looked up the directions, and it was 7 to 8 minutes away. I don't know what happened to that screenshot, but depending on which way he went, it was either going to be like 7 minutes one way and 8 minutes another way. I'll drop that screenshot in the community tab if one of my moderators can please remind me. So this is, 7:19, he starts heading over to Brandon's, which got him there sometime between 7:26 and 7:27. Now, I find that remarkably coincidental, because Brandon said he left his residence with his 4 kids at approximately 7:25. So it seems to me like Alex was waiting at the temple, and he would have had to have, in my opinion, some kind of information about when Brandon would leave his home to be able to drop the kids off and do everything that he needed to do to get them to school in time. So it's not a dead ringer, but I just find that like, I mean, he basically arrived just a minute or two after Brandon left. Now, I personally suspect that was by design, because their youngest was only 2 at that time. We know her age because Lori talked. She mentioned something to Zulema about going to her granddaughter's 2nd birthday party. So she went all in, and Colby's daughter was only 1, so she wouldn't have been having a 2nd birthday party. And excuse me, just looking at the picture there, I found a picture of, but Melanie, Brandon, and their kids, and shortly before this time, and their youngest looked like a toddler. So I think it's very safe to assume that their youngest was only 2. So Brandon could have been carrying her out to the car, and I think Melanie would have wanted to make sure that if she was involved in the planning, and again, this is all conjecture, but I strongly suspect that she would not have wanted her kids, at least not her youngest. There are some question marks about her 2 youngest, her 2 middle kids. Like, she thought that they had been killed, and that there was some issue about if they were light or dark, et cetera, et cetera. But it just sure seems like somehow Alex knew what time to get there, and then he had to wait for Brandon. I think the thing that they didn't anticipate was that Brandon stopped at the gym before coming home. Okay, on the same day, Lori orders her wedding ring. So, she's just, at this point, we don't know what time she ordered her wedding ring, but you just see, like, she's like, anyway, moving on. She orders the wedding ring. Obviously, Tammy is still alive at this point. And then the day after the shooting, Melanie, and as far as I know, from what I can see, she only had 1 interview with Gilbert police about the attempted shooting of Brandon, and that was the day after her shooting. And I'm going to read this because it defies all reason. Okay, after the initial investigation on October 2nd, I called Melanie Boudreaux, obviously this is from the Gilbert Police Report, and requested she come to the Gilbert Police Department for an interview. Melanie did not inquire about the specifics of the interview, but agreed to meet with me, on October 3rd at 10:30 in the morning. So already there, that's very weird. Like, an investigator calls you and says, hey, you know what? We would like you to come to the Gilbert Police Department for an interview. And she's like, Oh, okay, sure. How about tomorrow? Like the fact that she doesn't inquire about any of the specifics, but agrees to meet. I mean, already off the bat, highly suspicious. Melanie brought her youngest child with her to the interview. I have mentioned this in at least one other live, but I'm like, they have one interview with Melanie. Obviously, they see that they're affluent. She could afford a babysitter. She had a heads up, and they let her bring her youngest child in with her, who I believe was 2, so a toddler, in this interview. So, what kind of questions could they really ask with a toddler in the room? I could just imagine Melanie being like, yeah, could we not use the M word? And I mean, so this would have made the interview very stilted because they would have had to kind of tiptoe through the tulips. Again, this is operating under the assumption that she or her daughter was in the room with her. We don't know because the interview was, as it says here, video and audio recorded and later impounded as evidence, but it was not released as part of the FOIA docs. And FOIA docs, that just stands for documents that were released in as a result of the Freedom of Information Act. Okay. So, and I piecemeal parts of this report together because there are lots of details that aren't pertinent to the point I'm making here. So on October 3rd at approximately 10:30, Melanie Boudreau was interviewed and denied knowledge of the shooting and was unable to explain the details of her day on October 2nd. So they're asking her about, hey, what was yesterday like? And she already had a heads up that day that she was coming in. So you would think, like, I mean, she already, didn't have any curiosity about why she was being asked to come in, but then she still can't account for the details of her day. Melanie confirmed her relationship with Lori and Alex, but denied they were close. I mean, she only just visited them in Idaho, but okay. Melanie did not want to share their phone numbers because she believed their phones could be tracked and listened to. I asked Melanie to tell me about, and again, these are piecemealed from different parts of the police report. I asked Melanie to tell me about her day yesterday, October 2nd. Melanie told me Brandon dropped, I'm assuming off one of their kids, maybe the youngest, at her house in the morning. Melanie could not remember what she did after she took custody of that child. Melanie told me sometimes they went to the park, sometimes the gym, and other times the mall. So Melanie is just in true Melanie fashion. She was like, I don't know, here are some of the activities we, usually engage in. Sometimes we go to the park, sometimes the gym, sometimes the mall. Who knows what we did yesterday? Melanie could not remember for certain what they did yesterday. Melanie said she remembered ordering groceries online and then made dinner and went to bed. So that was all she could remember from the day before. I asked if she communicated with anyone. Melanie told me she received multiple phone calls from Brandon, which was not normal. Brandon sent a message to Melanie explaining that he had a bad day and wanted to check on their children. Melanie did not reply until today at 6:52 hours and messaged that the children were okay and she hoped Brandon had a better day. I mean, like obviously Brandon didn't text her like, "Hey, I know, we're separated and everything, but I really kind of had a bummer day today." Like it's just so insane. But also, Melanie, according to Ian, she was saying she hadn't seen her kids. She had heard that her 2 middle children were like killed. And so this also doesn't make sense that she was saying that like Brandon was checking to see if the kids were okay. So that also doesn't make sense. I mean, somewhere she's lying, but then also, the fact that she's like, she said the next morning she hoped Brandon had a better day. Otherwise, Melanie could not remember if she talked with anyone else again the day before. So super, super sketch. And that was it. They never brought her back. I mean, unless those details were heavily redacted, which is entirely possible. They never brought her back for another interview. Like, hey, how about you come back sans the toddler? Because we really need to follow up on some of these details. And like I said, they don't include any communication between her and Alex, Lori, or Chad around this time period. Okay, 10/4. So this is the next day. Chad, again, allegedly, starts planning Tammy's murder. Whoops. So let's see. All right, yeah, I'll just read the whole thing. In this iCloud account, I conducted a search using the word Tammy. In doing so, I located a series of SMS messages that were deleted from the iCloud account. The messages still had the date and time information attached. All messages were sent to Lori on 10/4 and 10/5. So I broke them up into the different days. One message was addressed to Sweet Angel and had a closing that was endearing. Another was addressed to Beautiful Lily. Therefore, one could suspect these were coming from Chad Daybell. Chad Daybell's phone records using the concealed number of, and they redact the number, matched up to these messages as well. These messages were dated before Tammy Daybell's death. The following messages were of importance. So this was on October 4th. Now keep in mind, Brandon was just shot at 2 days before. Melanie was just interviewed the day before. I mean, this is, when I talk about the velocity, when you look at it day by day, it's like, holy hell, like they were just moving on to the next thing. So Chad texts Lori, thank you for sending me that paragraph, Beautiful Lily. We don't know what that paragraph was. I'm eager to see you soon, trying to hasten her departure. I love you endlessly, and ridiculous emojis. So I think it's pretty safe to assume he's talking about Tammy. He's trying to hasten her departure, meaning her death. He follows up the next day. Again, he is, even at this point in October, he's still not criminally sophisticated. He tries to be, but you can see he's in full obsession mode. It's October 5th, and this is 3:25 in the morning. So he can't sleep. He is most likely just giddy with excitement. He's ready to move on to the next murder, in my opinion. Hello, Sweet Angel. Big news about Tammy. Please let me know if you are awake. Why would she be awake at 3:25? But okay. And can talk. I love you. Then he's like, no, this can't wait. I mean, it's just like 11 minutes later. Okay, so the short version is that she has been switched. Tammy is in limbo, and a level 3 demonic entity named Viola is in her body. It happened at about 10 p.m., so this was the day before, and was done by Tammy's sister. I'm sure this is Sam, who I always knew was a 3D, but it turns out she is a multiple creation. So even dark spirits could be multiple creation. That makes them more powerful for evil. And 3:44, so minutes later, follows up more. He's like, actually, okay, no, I have more to the story. Viola has been attached for about a year to my niece, who is 12, so-and-so's 12-year-old daughter. I have connected with Tammy in limbo, and she is very frustrated and upset. She wants Viola removed as soon as possible. So he's just serving Tammy. Like, he's just trying to sleep. And Tammy's like, hello, I'm in limbo. Can you get rid of Viola for me? I'm really upset and frustrated. Viola seems to be similar to Penelope. Now, that's weird because Penelope was Melanie Gibbs' name. So I don't know what that's about. At least I think that was Melanie Gibbs' name. From a previous probation, I think it was the probation where she was Chad and Lori's daughter. Anyway, the personality differences from Tammy should be evident quickly. Please seek a confirmation on this. So again, there's no, like Zulema and Melanie Gibbs' their attempt to say like Chad was the ringleader, he was the one like naming the names and coming up with all the dark spirits and their ratings. I mean, Lori rated like I forget how many like LDS prophets, but it was like I think 120 or like LDS people. It's all redacted. But I think it was like 120 or 121. So they were together in all of this. And he's asking her, like, I mean, basically, he's like floating this, like, are you still good with this? Please seek a confirmation. But I have now checked 3 times since I got home and get more affirmative answers each time. So home from what? Who knows? They probably met up. And then at 3:54, it says 10 minutes later, not fully sure of the timing for removal, but once her actions verify the differences, I don't want to wait. These statements would indicate that Chad Daybell was convinced that demonic or dark spirits were attached to his wife prior to her death. My main point is we just had the attempted shooting of Brandon, and he's like, okay, anyway, moving on. Let's attack, we need to go after Tammy. So where am I going with all of this? My theory is, again, pure conjecture, innocent until proven guilty, and then law enforcement's not even going after Zulema and Melanie, and even if Melanie Pawlowski. And I think even if they found out that she lied to Idaho law enforcement prosecution team, I still don't think that they're going to go after her. There just doesn't seem to be any inclination to go after any of these, what I would consider co-conspirators. But my theory is that I think Melanie made a big mistake in flying out to Idaho. I mean, it worked in her favor because these are the luckiest, in my opinion, the luckiest criminals on the face of the earth, because they were so unsophisticated and yet no one was ever coming after them. I just don't think that they're most likely ever going to go after anyone but Lori and Chad. I think at this point, everyone's just kind of focused, and they're not even going after Chad or Lori. Obviously they can't go after Alex or Melanie for conspiracy to commit murder. I mean, I didn't even share all of the details because this is already a very long live, but they didn't go after them, and again, I have no training in law enforcement, but the fact that they even, well, anyway, okay, all right, I made my point. Now, one other point I want to make, because I think it's important, is Melanie's attempt to split hairs and on this one point in her interview with Keith Morrison. If you're part of Cool Cats, I've mentioned it there. I'm sure I've mentioned it in lives, because it's always bothered me anytime someone is unnecessarily vague, which all of these players are frequently, or unnecessarily specific. That always kind of captures my curiosity. And so Melanie is usually unnecessarily vague and shares lots and lots and lots of details in hopes that the interviewer will abandon the original question. And and I'm not setting out to criticize those who interviewed her. I'm so grateful for all of these interviews. However, it has worked quite swimmingly for her, but you see Keith holding her feet to the flames in this question. But okay, so here we go.
Did you ever see Tyler and JJ?
When I moved up there, I did not see them.
No, they were gone.
So she already says, I mean, she could have just said, no, I never saw them. She starts off, when I moved up there, no, I did not see them. And she doubles down.
They were gone.
From November, from when I first got up there, I didn't see them.
So why would she do that? It's always bugged me. Why is she making this point from November? From when I first got up there, I didn't see them. And she had already slipped in another interview with Nate Eaton, where she started to talk about visiting Lori and realized like, back up. And, she starts talking about, because we had shared custody 50-50, and sometimes I just got so lonely and, all these things. And I was like, no, when did she visit? And so I had no idea initially, was it when Tylee and JJ were still alive? Was it, when was it? Okay. All right. Let me finish the rest of it.
Did you ask? Where are they?
I'd asked Lori. I wasn't close with Tylee during her teenage years. She was very independent. So if Lori, said that she was with friends, I just believed her.
So, I mean, that's always burned me. She doesn't even throw out the Melanie Gibb lie of like, oh, she thought that Tylee was at BYU. Excuse me. Even Melanie, when she talked with Sherry in the recorded conversation that she didn't know was being recorded, no, this was in her interview with Nate. Nate asked her, so, did that basically he was asking, did that sound believable? And Melanie even said, it didn't sound right, or it didn't feel right. Like, obviously it didn't feel right. She was 16, why would she be living on campus? But she actually told Sherry that Lori never even talked about Tylee when she was there. Anyway, I don't want to go too far down that path, but now we know that this wasn't just from November, and we know more than just from a very reliable, confidential source from the actual FOIA docs. Like, no, she was there after both Tylee and JJ were murdered and buried, and she would have been there right after JJ was buried. And we saw how absolutely obsessed and manic Lori was talking about Joe's death, and that was 6 months later. So you can only imagine how much she was obsessed in talking about, Tylee and JJ. And Melanie's trying to play this off like, well, I wasn't really close to Tylee, even though, they lived in the same city, for years, and as if that's even relevant. But obviously she was there right after both of the kids were murdered. But I think in Melanie's mind, again, all the caveats applied. I think she was just focused on like, yeah. Okay, let's get on to what I need. And, Melanie was the only one who stood to benefit financially if Brandon was murdered. So the fact that is like they just gave her a pass, I just think is just absolutely bizarre. So, okay, then Melanie got another pass by law enforcement, and repeated passes, but this was December 23rd. Okay, I'll just read it. Melanie was interviewed again by the FBI in Idaho. So, but for context, the case was public. It went public on December 20th. That's when the announcement was made. And, there was a lot of media coverage. And then the FBI met with Melanie and Ian. And so, okay, so it says Melanie was dishonest about facts, and then a long redaction. Melanie did not provide any additional leads or investigative information. Melanie was not challenged on her lies because Ian was present and still cooperating with law enforcement. And I've talked about this before, but this is not true. And this, even though this happened after the case went public, the source for this is still the Gilbert police report. So this is someone at Gilbert Police saying, we knew, Melanie, we knew she was lying, but she wasn't challenged because Ian was present and still cooperating with law enforcement. And we know that to not be true because on December 19th, this was a week after Alex died, Rexburg police circled back with another search warrant and searched Alex's uh, townhouse again. But they brought in a forensic team, and they reached out to Ian to get his help, like getting into the house. And Ian said that he went in and read the search warrant, and he was like, okay, this has gone too far, and he came clean to Melanie about his involvement on December 19th. So for them to say that when they talked with Melanie and Ian on December 23rd, they didn't challenge her lies because Ian was present and still cooperating with law enforcement, that is not substantiated elsewhere. And I don't think that it would be reasonable to assume that he was actually playing like a triple agent where, he was telling Melanie, oh yeah, I cooperated with police. I told them about some of the things you said. And then, her attorneys became his attorneys, and they're like, okay, you need to write down everything that you told them. And then he left that information on a laptop that Natalie found, and that's how we know about all the details that Ian recorded about this group. It wouldn't make sense that he would come clean to Melanie that he had talked with law enforcement, shared all of these details with her attorneys about what he told them, which was a lot, and then still on the sly have been cooperating with law enforcement. I think that is not reasonable to assume. So by way of summary, I would go back to this screenshot where it says between 9:25 and 9:30, Alex, Lori, and Chad. I would add in Melanie, prepared for Brandon's murder. Again, my opinion, your mileage may vary. If you want to access the presentation, you can go to bit.ly/Melanie with no E hyphen Zulema. Okay, so I will just a second. One of my laptops is about to die. So it's pretty late, but I'll take some questions. Please keep them to the topic at hand. And if you already asked a question earlier, you may want to ask it again. I also recommend that, it's not responding. I also recommend prepending your question with question in all caps. You don't have to write the entire question in all caps. That actually is a little harder to read. But yeah, I will try to answer as many questions as I can. Okay, after I get a drink. Okay. Okay. Thank you for the kind words. Like I said, I will go back and read these because I've missed the community so much, especially for this live. I'll go back. Okay, so we might not have very many questions. I mean, like I said, this was a thick and chewy cookie, and I really do think that this might be my deepest dive to date. There were just so many details, and it required a lot of research. I don't say that in a self-aggrandizing way. I just realized, like, for people who are following the case in, kind of a cursory way, I mean, you're going to get buried in all of these details, but, A Murderous Heart probably isn't the best YouTube channel if you really just kind of want the executive summary, because we do tend to take very deep dives. Excuse me. But yeah, lots and lots and lots of details. It probably feels like drinking from a fire hydrant. But for those who are following the case very closely, it can be helpful to go through the presentation. I try to include some details, like just in the slide title, and then build the presentation around that. But okay. I know someone recently commented that she like started watching old lives, I guess just going through withdrawal. Okay. All right. I haven't seen any questions yet. So I'm going to just look at just the most recent interactions. Thank you, Kathy. It's very sweet. And see if there are any questions. And if not, we will call it a night. I mean, it's been a pretty long life as it is. One other point that I'll make is that if you want to review just certain points in the live, one thing I try really hard to do is go back through the live and note the minute marks of different different points that I'm making. So, and then I include those minute marks in the description. I can't guarantee I'll always be able to do that because, like I said, there is somewhat of a unpredictable element as far as like my energy level and health and things like that. Overall, I feel really, really good. But I do try to do that. And whether you're on desktop or on a mobile device, those minute marks become live links. And if you click on them, it will fast forward to that part in the video. And you'll also see like the chat if you're interested in following the chat. But anyway, okay. Kay asked, will you write a book like this isn't like Kay Woodcock, I'm sure. That's another Kay. Will you write a book like a comprehensive investigation? Because I would totally read that. It's highly doubtful. I mean, I've already written 2 books. It is a very heavy lift. My books aren't like, well, okay, aren't like some of the books that some of these group members wrote where, they probably pulled it together in like a couple of days. Obviously, even whatever I write about is going to be very, very comprehensive. So, and especially with, some of the other things going on in my life, maybe, but, but like I always like to say, possible, not probable. Plus, I just don't know that I want to deal with all of the, oh, now she's profiting off of the kids' deaths, and this isn't something I've already, invested, obviously, a significant amount of time, and I have not monetized, regardless of what the trolls say, I have not benefited financially at all in any capacity. And I always link to, even when I had a GoFundMe, that was for the dashboard that I built. And I recorded every single contribution, whether they came in through Venmo or GoFundMe. And I included the person's first name and last initial, so that anyone, and this was always public throughout the campaign, and then I closed the campaign, and I was in the negative, and I recorded, I mean, the cost of every transcription, I mean, just every detail. So, okay. Anyway, question. Does the prosecutor keep in touch with you? Do they give you any updates? Yes, occasionally. I mean, now we're kind of in a desert, and one member of the team has encouraged me to call more, but I just told that person, like, all the questions I have, you can't answer. I know you can't answer. So they were like, try me. And so I asked 2 questions, and they just laughed and they were like, yeah, I can't answer that. And then I asked another one. He said, yeah, I can't answer that. So I was, I just tried to communicate to them, like, I trust you to do your jobs. Like, I'm not, so, different personalities, different, I kind of do my own thing. People ask if I'm passing on this information to law enforcement. we know that law enforcement is in cool cats, and I mean, everything now that I'm putting out there, almost everything is public, so anyone can follow it. The dashboard is still accessible, so yeah. Uh, Thanks, Brendan. That's sweet. Yeah, it just so happened, like, I was in between treatment plans and starting to feel better, and I just started digging. But some of these notes I had already made, and I was planning on doing lives, so it was just like, picking it up. And yeah, one of the other lives that I have planned, it's going to be a pretty deep dive off of an offshoot that I covered in this live, but it probably won't be quite this deep. Like, this is Adult Swim only. Crocheting Bammy asked, do you think law enforcement is waiting for the Daybell trial to be over before charging the others? No, I don't. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong. I don't think anyone else is going to be charged. Again, I'd love to be wrong, but when I read some of these details and you're just reading this stuff going, wait, so how is this not conspiracy? How are these not co-conspirators? How are these not, I mean, it's, like, you read their own words, like, yeah, so, Chad, Alex, Lori, they were planning Brandon's murder or, shooting. And you're just like, so, I mean, two of them are still alive, and then, okay, so Melanie, you just said Melanie was in town. You just confirmed that. And it's like, anywho, so yeah, Chad, Lori, and Alex, they were planning, Brandon's shooting. It's just like, it's just so, I mean, it gets to a point where it's just absolutely clownish. That's the only where, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to law enforcement. I can't imagine how much these cases have taxed their workload. However, I think the travesty with Brandon's shooting, even more so than Chandler, in some ways, is, like I said at one point, like, Chandler, I mean, like, they are going to really take it on the chin when that trial comes around. Like, I don't know how, Detective Moffat is going to have a job, because, I mean, there were indicators that Alex was not acting in self-defense, that they knew the day of the shooting. They knew from his own words, and one of the investigators even mentioned, he goes back in the room, he gets the gun, he doesn't lock the door, he says F that, he goes back. So he even makes the point. And Arizona is not like, and now I did this research in 2021, but they have very specific guidelines around what constitutes self-defense. And one of the guidelines is, if you can get to safety and you still, shoot someone, kill someone, harm someone, that is not considered self-defense. And Alex, now, I don't believe his whole story. I think, personally, I think Charles walked in and was just gunned down. I don't think there was a fight. I don't think there was a bat. I just think he walked in and was gunned down. But by Alex's admission, even with him putting his best foot forward, telling his best story, he clearly didn't do his research, because in Arizona, that's not self-defense. He didn't call 911. He didn't lock the door. Like, if there was evidence of the door being broken down and then he shoots Charles, like in the doorway, that Nellie, potentially has a case for self-defense. But so they already knew that his actions did not meet the criteria for self-defense. But also, before the day was over, they knew that Alex lied about Charles not being standing, or not, being, in a standing position for both of the shots. They knew as soon as they moved Charles' body, and this is going to be a little graphic, so a warning, if you can't handle graphic details, just pause this for like a minute, or hit the mute button. Having said that, they knew as soon as they moved Charles' body, and it said, then they cleaned up the blood that had pooled on the floor. That's when they saw that the floor was scarred. So they knew that Charles was already down when Alex shot him the second time. Well, according to Alex, Charles had a bat. Alex had a gun. Alex was not in danger for the second shot, and he lied. And then within a day or two, they knew that he also lied about calling Lori. So, in all of that case, like they just never pursued Alex. They had Alex and Lori come back to the house to walk them through. Lori was like, yeah, I need to go pick up JJ. They're like, oh, that's a bummer. I would have loved to also, have your take on it, talk to you separately. They didn't actually say all this. I'm just saying that they wanted both of them. And but then Lori told him that she needed to pick up JJ, and that was the end of that, and anyway, so I've already gone into the details of that, like in other lives. The last thing I'll touch on is, the fact that Detective Yinklin, she was the woman who interviewed Tylee and Lori, comes out to their car when again, Lori and Alex both came to the house because they were both supposed to come to the house. And then Detective Yinklin asked her, hey, do you have Alex's phone? Because we can't find it. And Lori's like, oh yeah, we found it in the car. So she was in Charles' rental car. Well, the whole basis of this supposed fight between them was over Charles' phone. And so, like, since Charles was killed, the phone, they couldn't have just serendipitously found his phone in his car. But that just went right over Detective Yinklin's hairspray. So I think that they're really, really going to be raked over the coals in that trial, and hopefully, because this was even earlier on in their, criminal activity, that they were, much less sophisticated than they were in, October and November, and they were not sophisticated then. So hopefully they put enough out there that they can still convict Lori. They didn't even go after Chad. But anyway, so I mean, their whole investigation was a joke. But with Gilbert, like I said earlier, like they actually did a legitimate investigation with, canvassing and, all of these details. I don't know about trajectory analysis. They don't have those details in the police report that I remember, but it really seems like they did their due diligence in a lot of ways, but then there just seemed to be no inclination whatsoever to actually go after these people. Not even Alex. It's not like Alex died within a few days of the attempted shooting of Brandon. He was alive for another couple months. And in fact, elsewhere in the FOIA docs, Gilbert police actually had eyes on both Alex and Zulema. They noted that, okay, yeah, we saw them leaving the Gilbert temple, and this was just a few days before Alex died. And I'm like, Okay, so he was already a suspect in the attempted shooting of Brandon, and at this point, these different law enforcement agencies had started working together. So they knew about the attempted shooting of Tammy. And then, Tammy dies. And, and Kay emailed Detective Moffat and was like, hey, you know, I think that this was Alex. This was in reference to the attempted shooting. And she's saying, and he's around my grandson. He's getting brazen, all these things. Like they had all of these, puzzle pieces. And then they have eyes on both Alex and Zulema. And they just note it. They didn't pick him up. It's just, I really just don't understand. But anyway, but I think that's where, I mean, it's almost like, in their case, it's like the receiver catches the ball, is running downfield and then just, trips over his shoelace and fumbles it at the, 5-yard line. But anyway, so yeah. So again, for what it's worth. But for me, it is very frustrating. Because this lack of action, again, it was not without consequence. Like it's so unimaginable to me how much like the stars just kept aligning for these criminals. It's just like they were terrible liars. They were terrible at covering their tracks. They're using burner phones, but then they're logging in, to verified accounts. I mean, they're doing all of these really, really stupid things. They're telling really like tragically terrible lies, and they just keep getting passed on. And with Zulema, she didn't even have the benefit of, and I don't mean this, again, I'm not trying to be mean, but she, like, at least like with Lori and Melanie, you see them using their beauty and their charm. And Zulema, I mean, she's a fairly attractive woman, but she's not charming, and even with her, though, you have a detective going, well, wait a minute, wait, okay, so I realize that, I know what you're getting at. It kind of sounds like she lied about not seeing Chad and Lori after she moved, but maybe she was talking about their move to Hawaii, and Zulema just, takes that ball and run with it. And so, even with Zulema and Alex, even Alex, he wasn't, attractive. He wasn't charming. He wasn't intelligent. He wasn't any of these things. And yet, Chandler never went after him. I think the whole reason they went to and I did a live where I broke down the GPS coordinates from the day of Charles' shooting. And one of the stops was unusual. It was before they went back to the house, and someone commented, I wish I could remember their name, but they commented on the video, and I do monitor the comments after my moderators kind of scan for like all the troll comments and things like that. But this person commented, hey, yeah, that office park, that's where Summer's husband practices as a chiropractor. I was just like, you have got to be kidding me. So while Detective Yinklin and Detective Moffat and these investigators were at the house, processing the crime scene, doing important things like taking pictures of the blood on the sink, but not swabbing it anyway. We know from one of the pins that Lori was at Alex's, and I'm sure Tylee was probably with them as well. So she was at Alex's for quite a while. And what I suspect is that they were at like height paranoia. They're thinking like, Chandler, they're going to get a search warrant. They're going to search Alex's, house. They're going to, do all these things. And so they stop at this office park, and there were at least two, big trash cans, not trash cans. I'm sorry. Word recall is an issue. Dumpsters. There were at least two dumpsters, and it was somewhat of a newer. At that point, it wasn't as developed as it is now. But anyway, there were dumpsters in there, and so I suspect that they already knew about that. That professional office park because of Summer's husband, and I suspect that they dropped off evidence that was at Alex's house. And if that's true, and I do think that is a very viable working theory, it was all for naught. No one ever. Yeah, I think there was a reference at one point in the Chandler police report that someone drove to I don't even think it was Alex's. Maybe they drove by Alex's, but I think it was Lori's, but noted no one was home. So that was it. But anyway, so yeah, yeah, it's just it's maddening. Okay. Oh, Crocheting Bammy. She always asks such good questions. She asks, what are your thoughts on Judge Boyce closing the courtroom to press recording? Now, I did say, please keep the questions to this topic, but because there just aren't that many questions, I will answer that. I'm kind of two minds with that. I try to be somewhat careful when I say publicly. I do appreciate Judge Boyce. I do feel like throughout the course of this case, I think he has been coming into his own. He was a relatively new judge when they rolled into town, and Rob Wood was an even newer prosecutor. So you have these people who weren't on the job long, and they didn't sign up for this. Obviously they had no idea that this much evil would descend on these these little bedroom communities. But I do think that he has been coming into his own. So I'll give him that. Like, he doesn't, even when I was there for the one hearing, like prior, stood up, and he was just bellicose, and like trying to. I think he even like hit the table, but he was being really dramatic. And Judge Boyce, he's very quiet, somewhat reticent, man of few words, but he basically asked him to stay seated throughout the ride, and Pryor had to sit back down, and he wasn't able to do that again. And earlier on, Judge Boyce just seemed kind of like scared, kind of excuse me, deer in the headlights. So I'll give him that. I personally, I think that, and I'm not blaming. Oh my gosh, I can't think of her name. The attorney, Lori Hellis. I'm not blaming Lori Hellis for that decision. However, I'm always looking at timelines. I'm always, looking for crescendos and decrescendos, and things like that. Any kind of pattern is interesting to an analyst, or anomalies. So like, you see these patterns, and then there's something that is an anomaly to an established pattern. And so it does seem like when she submitted her first motion, I was somewhat surprised by the tone and the severity of Judge Boyce's response. I mean, I certainly understand it. I'm not saying I would have done any better. I mean, she basically was, challenging his integrity, the integrity of the investigators, and then there was some circuitous logic, like, these social posts were posted, but I don't have evidence because they were taken down. Like, well, okay, but like, where's your evidence? Like, you can't really, leverage such, pretty stinging allegations and then be like, well, I I don't have the evidence because of how skeevy they've been. And then you went through and deleted it. Well, did you not grab any screenshots? If not, why are you submitting this? So, but it did seem like his response was pretty severe. He seemed pretty fired up. Again, not that I would blame him. But and then you see this back and forth, and he's basically making her thread the needle. Like, if you get this exactly right, then I will entertain your ridiculous motion. And then from my recollection, the decision to not allow cameras in the courtroom followed in pretty quick succession. So, I mean, obviously, this was a motion made by the prosecutorial team. And Pryor said later that he didn't agree with it, but he wasn't at that hearing. So that was a weird flex. Like, I don't know what he was thinking. Was he not on the invite list? Like, and that was just really weird. But having said all that, I mean, it rubbed me the wrong way in some ways, just because this seems like a move back. Like, this doesn't seem like progress. Like, progress is, I mean, there are lots of high publicity cases that they had cameras in the courtroom. OJ Simpson, I mean, there obviously have been a lot of cases. And so it just seems very unusual that at this juncture in time that we would move backwards in, like, whatever the opposite of progress is, regression, like, we're going to go back to the 40s or whenever, the fireside chats were. I mean, that's what it felt like to me. That was before the 40s. But anyway, so so it just seems weird that this is such a high publicity case and people are only going to have audio. But at the same time, trying to kind of look at all sides. Like, is there anything that's, that I see potentially that's beneficial? And one, I do think that without the camera, so overall, no, I'm not happy about the decision, especially with some of the things that I've been dealing with, the chances of my being able to now, like, take more time off and, go to these trials. It's that's not looking really good. So so I'm not really happy about it. But at the same time, if this this isn't overturned, or he doesn't reconsider his decision, I do see some benefits. Like, Lori's not going to have a camera to perform in front of. So I see a significant benefit there. And also, Chad isn't going to have a camera. I don't see that he's been playing to the camera, but I do think that Pryor very much plays to the camera. And I've talked about this in other lives where, I mean, it's just downright bizarre how he so clearly has Chad, many times sit with his hands on the table, and, he's sitting stiff as a board. He's not showing any emotion. He's kind of looking askance. There was one time where the camera caught him looking back toward the group of us that were in the courtroom when I was there. Prior, also, he took a protracted gaze back at us, and that I actually saw. I didn't see Chad look back at us. But, for the most part, Chad's just sitting there, ironically, like a freaking zombie. He shows no emotion. And I think, he's following Pryor's directions, because you even see Pryor doing weird things in the preliminary hearing, like turning and like looking at Chad angrily and things like that, in different hearings. I mean, he's very unprofessional in a lot of ways. And so I just think, like, Pryor's not going to have the camera to play to. Lori's not going to have the camera to play to. And so I do think that in some regard, I can understand why the prosecutors didn't want cameras in the courtroom. Again, I just don't think that this is what progress looks like. And I think, like, well, lots of other prosecutors have had to deal with this issue. If the glove does not fit, you must acquit, or, whatever that little catchy phrase was. Obviously that worked very much to OJ's team's benefit. But anyway, yeah, there are potentially some benefits, but okay. Let me see. Are there any other questions? I'll take 2 more if they're on topic. Someone said 10 weeks. I don't know what that is a reference to. Beach Monkey asked, did this info come from docs submitted to family? No, all of this information all came from the FOIA docs, which were submitted to reporters. So reporters submit a request based on the Freedom of Information Act, and then these agencies go through, redact. Again, some of them are like, it's beer o'clock somewhere, and they just leave stuff unredacted. And, I'm sure no one anticipated a family member actually going through and looking for all these. But no, these all were released to reporters, and 2 reporters passed the documents on to me. So there's only one document that I have that was passed on to me from someone who was involved in the investigation into the allegations against Joe. And though that person, they were involved in the investigation and said, I could share them, or, do whatever I want. I forget exactly what their words were, but there is such incendiary material in. It's a very, very long document, and it spans, I think, multiple years, and there are very, very serious allegations. And I feel like it takes the wisdom of Solomon to decide, because I have considered doing a live that provides some of the background about Colby's allegation against Joe. But at this point, I just kind of go back and forth. But anyway, other than that, all of the documents have either been publicly released, or they were passed on to me, and someone either they either gave me permission to release them, like the Lori's testimony at Melanie Gibbs' house, and the recording with Melanie Gibb and Sherry, that was passed on to me, but I looked up where Sherry lived and she was in a one-party consent state, meaning that, oh no, I'm sorry, a two-party consent state, meaning that both parties would have needed to consent to the recording. I think there are only like 11 states. So, and I just assumed that this person lived in Arizona. It was just like I'd actually gone through and like masked her voice. I did all of these edits to this whole thing. And I was just like, oh, by the way, do you live in one? I didn't want to ask her any personal questions, but I was like, do you live in any of these states? And she was like, yeah, I do. Why? I was like, oh no, I can't. I mean, obviously I could have, she had passed it on to me, but I knew that, potentially she could be sued. And so I said that, I can't in good conscience release this. And then someone else got the full recording that was twice as long as the recording Sherry gave me. And someone released it. So someone who didn't care about a two-party consent state, but now it's out there. But I had nothing to do with that. But where am I, to make a short story very long, I'm always very, very, very careful to note if anything was shared with me that I can't share. Like I'll share like, little snippets. At this point, I've only shared little snippets of the document that was passed on to me in Cool Cats. So and I actually let Janeese Summers see that document, see the verified email that sent me the document, just so that I'm never, if at all possible, I'm never putting myself in a position where I'm saying, hey, take my word for it. I mean, I know that this just looks like words from a Word document and I could have written this. First of all, my conscience would never allow that. I would just never be able to sleep. But I'm in those situations, at least I can say, there is one other person who can verify this. Any of the other, like if I say a confidential source, then that's just a confidential source. So, take my word for it or not. But I do tend to, even when I share those things, I do tend to share like, okay, this source has been very reliable. Like I'm sure if you went back to the video where I shared that calendar, I am sure I would have said this source has been very reliable, because I think that particular source, I want to say batting 1,000, but I think one time one of their dates was off by one day. But anyway, but if it's someone who, I mean, if I can't verify anything, I just won't share it. If it's someone who I've only received information one time and I can't verify, I will indicate that. So, okay. Okay. So one more question. I'm going to go to the most current. AJ, do you think Zulema had a hand in Alex's death? Yes. Yes, I do. I don't know how much, but I personally believe that, as I said in the presentation, I believe that the bag of money she talks about did not come from Alex. I don't think that she'd be like, okay, I mean, he told me about this bag of money, but, that's none of my business. That's his money. So, I didn't look at it. I didn't open it up. And then after he passed away, I didn't even count the money. My daughter and her boyfriend counted it, because I'm just so trusting of my daughter and her boyfriend. And I just want to make sure I am distancing myself. If I throw my daughter under the bus, make her a witness, so be it. She'll get through it. But yeah, I don't think that her story is even remotely believable. Just like her claim. I mean, I think like I want to say all of these players, they are not sophisticated liars. Like they overstate, like their lies are just so unrealistic, So I think even the detail, like someone asked, what about, when Alex threw down the tarp on the bed for sexy time with Zulema. I was just like, I'm not even going to answer this, and I don't mean that disrespectfully toward the person who asked, but like, first of all, it's a claim. It's not a fact. Zulema is telling a story, and personally, I think that is such an outrageous claim. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah. So I know that this guy is like Dexter, except the people aren't guilty who he's like plowing down. And I actually was totally down with all of these people. And I even said, hey, I'll protect them. I will usher them. And even made a special point. I will usher JJ, to the Lord's presence, And so, I mean, the only like slight hesitation that I can think of that Zulema ever offered was right before mm, uh, Charles was murdered. She was like, "Do you think Hiplos could be turned to the light?" And I don't even personally, I just can't give her the benefit of the doubt. Um, I just think like she was just covering herself, like, I threw it out there, and Lori just didn't reply, and yeah. So I mean but that was it. Other than that, you would think like if she really had hesitation, then after Charles was murdered, why would she head on out to Idaho? To stay with them, and clearly she's like so excited. That was awesome, and so you just don't see any bit of hesitation. So she already knew Charles was identified as a zombie, and then he was killed. And she gets there. She gets her in between Tylee and JJ's murders. Tylee is gone. Zulema doesn't even offer up an explanation as to why she didn't see Tylee, or why they didn't stop by BYU or anything like that. And then we find out even after JJ was murdered, Tammy was shot at, but it was botched, and it appears Alex sent her money. Like, what did she do? If that's true, and I'm understanding that correctly, what did she do that earned her a transfer from Alex? Like, we don't know. But and then Tammy actually dies, and she's still just back and forth in communication with these people. And then after Lori and Chad marry, right immediately after Tammy's death, then they're like, hey, can you meet up with us tomorrow, on our layover, at the tail end of our layover? And she's like, sure, I can move my appointments around. I can do whatever, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, it's not until she gets into her interview with, Detective Hermosillo and Kaaiakamanu, and whoever the other guy was, that she was like, yeah, it's kind of weird. They were talking about zombies, and I'm like, whoa, I mean, she's just trying so hard to distance herself, but none of her actions leading up to that communicated, in my opinion, any attempt to distance herself. And in fact, she was the last one to meet with them before all of this went down, potentially. But anyway, so yeah, I personally, I think she absolutely played a hand. I think, Alex made some weird references, and even the fact that he called Chad for he called Chad when he wasn't feeling well. I suspect that Chad and Lori both were like, you can't go to the hospital. They're looking for you, and so they were probably, and again, this is pure conjecture. There's nothing in the FOIA docs that indicates this, but I can imagine. And, and Alex was very low IQ. And I don't say that to be offensive or rude. I mean, he it's evidence through, it's evident throughout his communications with Lori and with others that he was very, very slow. I mean, to the point, like, he said something, and Lori, who is his younger sister, was like, good boy. I mean, all of these people are just like, they just didn't have boundaries. But I think he especially um, was especially susceptible to be manipulated. And I went into this with the whole Smule songs, but you see, even dating back to 2000, 2017, I think it was like November or December 2017, when Lori wrote her weird version of Hallelujah and ruined the song. It talks about, like, the story she tells is an eerie retelling of her working on him. Like, she talks about, how it started with Julie Rose podcast, and then he cried himself to sleep, and he saw the light, and all of these things, and then he knew what to do. Like, that was just shortly before. So that was, I think it was November 2017. I don't have those details right in front of me, but then Colby said that Lori and Alex started hanging out together around January 2018. So Lori sings this song in the end of 2017. Colby notes that somewhere around January 2018, they reunite. Brandon also noted that it was around the same time that Lori and Melanie started spending time together. So it sounds like Lori wasn't always like really close to either Alex or possibly Melanie. But then, she just starts like gathering these people who I believe their initial objective, personally, I believe their initial objective was to murder Joe. I do believe Joe was most likely, very likely, murdered. And I think Lori was just absolutely fascinated by how easy that was. No one came after her. No one investigated his death. They ruled it a heart attack, and they never even opened him up. It was just based on, an external, how do they call it? Investigation. It wasn't an investigation, external examination, and his medical records. And I mentioned this in another live, but another ME had made the point when I was on the Nancy Grace podcast. He was shocked when I said, and this was before we went live, I said, well, they never opened him up. They didn't do like an internal examination. It was all like, his cause of death was based on an external examination. He was like, if they didn't open it up, if it was based on an external examination, it should not have been ruled natural causes. It should have been ruled unknown. He's like, you can't just do an external examination and look at someone's medical records and call the cause of death. So what do I know? I'm not a medical examiner, but I thought that was very interesting, and it's intuitive. It's just like, you kidding me? Like, it's like, yeah, that guy looks like he died of a heart attack. Let's just move on. But anyway, so it just appears that, and I'm not in any way making excuses for Alex. He was a sentient human being. He he clearly lacked, a moral compass. He had a little to no regard for the law. And you see when he's being questioned by, Chandler police, he has this MO. He's like being flippant, somewhat respectful, but being like a buddy, he's asking the investigator who drove him to the police station, he's just like, striking up a conversation with him, talking about how hot the vest must be. And, they're just having a conversation. And so he was sophisticated enough to, know, like, to just be like, yeah, just never let him see you sweat. Like, yeah. I mean, he's just so cavalier about the whole thing. And then, again, when he was in, where was it? American Fork, when Melanie trespassed on Brandon Boudreaux's parents' property. He's again, just, like I made this point in another live, I keep saying that, but when the, police officer or detective, whoever it was, came up to his window, at first Alex was just very shut down, and then I think the guy called him dude or something, and you just see Alex relax, and then he draws attention away from the car, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I bet there was a gun in that car, because Alex knew to divert the guy's attention, and he's just being casual, like, yeah, I don't know why I moved to Idaho, it's cold, they're just having a conversation. So he was sophisticated enough to know to just stay really, really calm under pressure. So so he was intelligent enough to have an MO. But I do think that, his being kind of exiled from the family. I've talked about this before, about how even when he writes the note to his friend and refers to his mom as Janice, like, he wanted his friend to get Joe's, I think, license plate number or something like that. He was like, yeah, some guys in here, basically they were going to finish a job. I mean, that's kind of what he implied. But just the fact that he referred to her as Janice, and, it just seemed like, he was excommunicated. I think he was a source of shame. He wasn't particularly successful. He wasn't particularly handsome, especially as he got older. And so I think Lori was most likely able to manipulate and like give him that sense of like belonging, acceptance, purpose. Like, you are my protector. You play a really big role in all of this. And then Chad's like, hey, like, I know initially Lori was thinking you're a first creation, but you're actually a fifth creation, and your whole objective in this last probation was to protect your sister, and until Chad took over that responsibility. And anyway, so yeah, so I and again, if you look at the Reddit email, or I call it the Reddit email because it was something that someone, we actually know who the person was who sent it to law enforcement. I don't share that in the lives, but it wasn't redacted. But in the in that screenshot, it actually says source Melanie Gibb. So up until I saw that in the FOIA docs, we didn't know who the actual source of this information was. But the fact that it's Melanie Gibb, and she had a front row seat to, all of this, a lot of this. I think and there were details. Let me back up. There were details in that Reddit email that were out there long before they came to light through different, FOIA docs, like the trickling of FOIA docs, mostly from Justin Lum, before we had like these massive, document dumps. But so this person, I remember back in December reading a summary of these points that someone else had like written out the summary. And I was like, how did this person know all of this information? And so not everything has been verified, like, Jason Mal giving Lori to Chad, that hasn't been verified. It might not ever be verified. But, the fact that she lists a specific date, and the fact that Chad and Lori, well, according to, like I said in this live, according to the Idaho affidavit of probable cause, started conspiring to murder Tammy as early as October 1st, then that makes that, that claim about the temple, I think more feasible. And also, Jason Mal's description of their meeting, as much as he now tries to distance himself from Lori and Chad, I mean, he was tripping over himself. He was fanboying hard over Lori. So he introduced Melanie, said she was a gatherer. He's very nice. And then he was like, Lori is so cool, and then he is talking about how, like, a lot of people don't know who she is, but those who are in the know who she is. And, this was December 2018, so, or January 2019. I mean, it was very, very early on. And he's just like, and I just knew as soon as I saw her, like, you're one of us, you're a gatherer. I mean, you have to listen to like all of the emotion and the gushing. Yeah, but then when like they have the email exchange, he's much more careful. Yeah, it doesn't communicate that same level of emotion as when he talked about it on the podcast. And I'm very thankful for Denise Rainey, who she was a YouTuber who was covering this story early on, and then died in 2020. But before she died, she passed, and she published that podcast, and unfortunately passed on some of the podcasts to another reporter who did not publish them, who buried them. But that's a different story. But anyway, but that's how we know about, just how smitten might not be the right word, but enamored Jason seemed to be with Lori, who he had just met. So anyway, okay, on that note, have a great night. It was absolutely, from my perspective, it was great just to be able to be with the community again. And like I said, I plan to, health willing, but, may need to have some flexibility, but I plan to keep this going. So, okay, have a great night and weekend. Bye.